It started with a dare, like a lot of dumb things in high school do. And if I'm being totally honest, I didn't even need that much convincing. I'd always been a sucker for weird places, and anything labelled forbidden was like catnip for someone like me. I was 17, bored, and chasing the kind of thrill that made my hands shake. My friend Caleb knew that, which is probably why he picked me first. "Dude, come on," he said, dangling the old rusted keyring in front of my face like some kind of prize. "We've got one shot at this. Hollow Pines is getting demolished next month." Hollow Pines boarding school was the kind of place that had haunted the town for decades. Closed down in the early 90s after a series of mysterious events, which is what all the old newspaper clippings called them: fires, missing kids, a janitor who supposedly hung himself in the basement. You know, the usual. The place had been shuttered and locked since before we were born, and half of it had collapsed in on itself. But if you looked it up online, you'd find grainy photos, vague accounts, and one forum post from 2009 warning people to stay the hell away. Looking back though, I should have taken that warning seriously, not brushed it off like a story meant to scare teenagers. But when you're 17 and you've got something to prove, common sense gets shoved way down. The plan was simple. Caleb had a cousin who worked for the demo crew and snuck us a copy of the key to the north entrance. We'd head in Friday night, me, Caleb, Sasha, and Will, just the four of us. Phones charged, flashlights packed, and one cheap handheld camcorder Caleb bought from a pawn shop. Sasha joked it would be our found footage. She always said creepy stuff with this calm little smile, like she wanted things to go sideways. I'll skip the boring stuff, the planning, the supply run, the debate over which snacks to bring. We met up just after 9 p.m. outside the old chain link fence. It was colder than it should have been for late spring, the kind of cold that sits in your chest like a warning. The building loomed behind the trees, black and broken. We had to crawl under the fence since the main gate was padlocked, even with the key. Caleb led the way, holding up the camcorder like a trophy. "If we find a ghost," he said, grinning, "I want to catch it on tape." Will rolled his eyes, but didn't say anything. He never did. He was the quietest one in our group, mostly there because Sasha dragged him everywhere. I still don't know why he came that night. The door creaked when we unlocked it, louder than expected. We all stood there for a second, flashlights aimed into the darkness beyond, not saying a word. Then Sasha just walked in, no hesitation. I followed her, trying not to look like my heart was pounding. Caleb and Will came last, and just like that, we were inside Hollow Pines. The air was heavy, thick with dust and mildew. It smelled like mold, rust, and old rot. But the first few minutes, they were kind of exciting. The front hall was massive, its high ceilings crumbling in some places, glass from broken chandeliers littering the floor. There were old student murals peeling off the walls, slogans about leadership and discipline fading into nothing. We found the admin office, old filing cabinets still filled with papers. Some of them had blood-colored stains on the corners, but we told ourselves it was just rust. There was graffiti everywhere, tags from kids who'd snuck in years before. US, stuff like they watched through the walls, and he's still down there. Honestly, we thought it was all part of the vibe. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just some rundown building. It felt wrong. Like the silence wasn't empty. It was holding its breath. I didn't say anything though. Didn't want to be the first to spook. We made our way to the second floor. Most of the stairwells were half collapsed, but we found one that held our weight. The dormitory halls were long and narrow, rooms filled with shattered furniture, old metal bed frames, and the occasional stuffed animal mummified in mold. Sasha picked up a journal. Someone named Kayla had written about dreams of a boy with no eyes who waited by the lockers. She read it out loud, voice echoing down the corridor. Caleb laughed. Well, didn't. It wasn't until we reached the gym that the air changed. Not the temperature. The feeling. It got heavy. Like something was pressing down on us. I told myself it was just the ceiling sagging or maybe the building itself settling. But something made me check my backpack. That's when I noticed. My flashlight batteries were missing. I'd packed extras. I was sure I had. I even remember putting them in the side pocket, but they were gone. Sasha said hers were too. I had a full pack, she muttered, digging through her bag. What the hell? Caleb accused her of forgetting. She insisted she didn't. We laughed it off, kind of, but that weird pressure hadn't lifted. That night, we made a camp of sorts in one of the old classrooms. Just for a bit, to rest. Caleb wanted to get a few recordings, maybe stage a fake scream or whisper to mess with future viewers, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. That something in that school didn't like us being there. I still had no idea what was coming, but the pieces were already moving. The basement wasn't even mentioned that night, not until Sasha found something in the next room. At first, exploring Hollow Pines felt more like a scavenger hunt than anything truly frightening. The danger felt distant, like something from a story other than the walls around us. We poked through the classrooms and offices, holding our flashlights like swords, brushing dust off crumbling desks and opening cabinets that hadn't been touched in years. There was a strange joy in it, like we were discovering something forbidden, but forgotten, and that made it feel safe, or at least safer than we expected. Sasha found a box of report cards under a collapsed shelf and started reading the names in a fake British accent, pretending to be some fancy headmistress giving out grades. Caleb and I joined in, exaggerating it, until we were all laughing, our voices bouncing off the walls. It was easy to pretend we weren't surrounded by decay. For a little while, it was just another night with friends, wrapped in the kind of thrill that made our skin buzz and our steps lighter. Even we cracked a smile when we found a room full of ancient science posters and an old chalkboard with Help US scratched into it, clearly done by some other kid long before we got there. We weren't scared yet. If anything, we were caught up in the romance of it. The way abandoned places hold on to silence, like a secret. The way every creak and groan of the building felt like it had a story behind it. I remember the way the flashlight beams danced over old bulletin boards, faded announcements still barely pinned up, and student artwork curled and yellowed by time. It felt like we were the first to really see it in years, like we'd uncovered a time capsule no one had meant to hide. It was Sasha who found the hatch. She'd wandered into one of the old supply closets and stepped on it by accident. It was hidden under a tattered rug, sealed with a rusted metal ring and bolted shut. We all crowded around as she pulled the rug back and tapped the hatch with her boot. The sound echoed differently, deeper, hollower. Caleb knelt beside it and ran his fingers around the edge. There was no writing, no label, just a heavy old padlock clamped onto it that looked older than all of us combined. Probably just old pipes or something, Caleb said, but his voice was quieter now. I noticed he didn't touch the lock. He just stood and backed away, suddenly interested in the peeling paint on the walls. Sasha, on the other hand, was fascinated. She knelt back down, pushed her ear to the hatch, and whispered, "I think I heard something." Who looked like he wanted to leave. I couldn't blame him. There was something different about that part of the building. The stillness there felt thicker, like the air didn't want to move. But again, none of us really said it. We just chalked it up to being tired and on edge. We'd been there for over an hour, and the excitement was slowly bleeding into unease. Though none of us admitted it out loud, we set up a small rest spot back in the hallway, where the roof hadn't collapsed, using our backpacks as cushions. Caleb offered to go get the tripod he'd left at the entrance, and Sasha volunteered to go with him, leaving Will and me alone by the classroom door. That's when I noticed something strange. My hoodie, the one I tied around my backpack strap earlier, was missing. I was sure I hadn't moved it. I even double-checked the spot where we sat down. Gone. Will said he hadn't touched it. And I believed him. It wasn't the kind of thing you'd forget. I brushed it off, tried to convince myself it had fallen off somewhere, but the knot had been tight. Too tight to just slip loose. Looking back though, that should have been another red flag. That, along with the chill that suddenly settled around us, like the building had exhaled all at once. We sat in silence until the others returned, Sasha chattering about how the wind outside had knocked over a caution sign that hadn't been there before. Caleb didn't say much, and neither did Will. We just sort of stared at that hatch, sitting quiet in the supply closet, like it was waiting. Still, no one wanted to leave, not yet. The place had sunk its teeth in, and we were all still telling ourselves we could handle it. That this was just another dumb teenage night with too many ghost stories and not enough sleep. We didn't know that Hollow Pines had already started pulling things from us. Little things, harmless things. Just enough to make us ignore the bigger warning signs that were coming next. The longer we stayed inside Hollow Pines, the more the air changed, like the building itself had started watching us. It wasn't anything we could prove or even clearly describe, but there was a growing weight behind every breath, a pressure that made it feel like we were slowly sinking into something we couldn't see. The laughter had mostly stopped by then. Our voices got quieter, our movements slower, and the space between us began to widen like we were afraid to be too close or too far. I thought maybe I was just tired. The air in that place made you tired in a way that went beyond your muscles. It crawled into your thoughts and started blurring things, memories, time, even direction. We started noticing that some of the rooms we had just explored were suddenly different when we passed by again. Chairs that weren't there before were now sitting against the walls. Classroom doors that had been stuck shut were now wide open. Sasha said maybe we just mixed up the halls, but I was sure we were retracing the same route. Caleb tried to laugh it off, but he was checking over his shoulder more often than before. He kept turning the camcorder on and off like he was expecting to catch something. Not a ghost exactly, just something wrong. We found a stairwell that led down, but it was blocked by collapsed bricks and rotting support beams. Still, the sense that we were being pulled downward, toward the basement, never really left us. It clung to the back of my neck like cold breath. Around that time, Sasha realized her cross necklace was missing. She'd been wearing it the whole time. A thin silver chain with a tiny sapphire at the center, a gift from her aunt. She wore it every day, never took it off, not even to sleep. But now it was just gone, chain and all, as if it had never been there. We searched the area we'd been resting in, checked her bag, looked around the hallway in case the clasp had broken. Nothing. She was shaken, but tried to act like it was no big deal, even though her hands wouldn't stop shaking when she packed up her bag again. That's when I noticed something even stranger. My phone was gone. Not just misplaced, gone. I'd zipped it into the inside mesh pocket of my backpack before we entered, and now that pocket was unzipped and empty. No one had seen it. I asked everyone, even dumped the contents of my bag on the floor. Caleb made a joke about the building eating stuff, but his voice was too high, too tight around the edges. Will didn't even speak. He just looked at the nearest window and muttered, "I think we should leave soon." But we didn't. Of course we didn't, because leaving meant admitting we were scared. And none of us wanted to be the first to say it out loud. Instead, we pushed deeper into the west wing, a part of the building that looked more intact. That's when we found the nurse's office, or what was left of it. The room was small, and the light from our flashlights caught on rusted medical cabinets and a tipped-over cot. In one of the drawers, Sasha found a notebook. It was damp, the pages stuck together, but some entries were still readable. They were dated 1989. The handwriting was messy, anxious. One page talked about a student named Aaron who kept staring at the same corner of the ceiling and wouldn't respond to questions. Another mentioned a boy named David who tried to dig through the floor with his bare hands during recess. The final legible entry just said, "The doors don't stay locked anymore. It comes in when it wants." The rest of the page had been torn out. Caleb read it in a monotone voice, like he didn't want to believe what he was reading. We left the room while we were still going through it. When we found him, he was standing at the end of the hall, facing the wall like he was listening for something. When we asked what he was doing, he just turned around slowly and said, "There's something downstairs." None of us had mentioned the hatch since we found it, and none of us had talked about the basement, yet there it was again, bubbling up into conversation, like the building was pushing it into our mouths. Looking back though, that moment with Will should have told us everything we needed to know. He wasn't the type to stir things up, and the way his voice sounded, like he was somewhere else entirely, made the hair on my arm stand up. But Caleb said we were just freaking ourselves out, that it was late and our heads were playing tricks on us. "Let's check one more wing," he said. "Then we'll go." It sounded reasonable at the time. That's what made it worse. We kept going. Not because we wanted to anymore, but because we didn't know how to stop. Every step forward felt like it was being chosen for us, and none of us realized just how deep we were in until it was already too late. That last hallway stretched longer than it should have. It was the west wing, and the air shifted noticeably the moment we crossed into it, colder, stiller, like we'd crossed an invisible line. The overhead beams groaned every few minutes, but it wasn't the building settling. It felt timed, rhythmic, like something was moving far above us, dragging its weight back and forth along the ceiling. We tried to act normal, flashing our lights into doorways, and joking half-heartedly about finding secret stashes of old snacks or ancient textbooks, but our footsteps echoed sharply, and our voices came back sounding strange, thinner, like they weren't really ours anymore. Sasha was the first to start acting off. She'd always been bold, the type to push doors open and stick her head into dark corners just for the reaction. But now she was walking slower, stopping randomly, and tilting her head like she was trying to catch a sound no one else could hear. I caught her tracing her fingers along the walls once, her eyes glassy. When I asked if she was okay, she snapped back to herself with a quick, forced smile. "Just thinking," she said. But her hand didn't stop moving for a few seconds after. Caleb stopped filming around then. He said the battery was dead, but I think it was something else. He was quieter, more serious, checking behind us constantly. He muttered to himself a few times, like he was rehearsing an excuse or trying to calm himself down without drawing attention. When I asked if he was all right, he just shrugged and said, "We should have brought salt." I thought he was joking, but his eyes didn't match the tone. Will, meanwhile, had taken to trailing behind us, always the last in the group. He didn't say much, and when he did, it was to ask weird questions like, "Do you think it remembers who used to live here?" Or "How long do you think something like this can wait?" We decided to stop moving and rest for a while. The floor beneath us creaked like it was straining under our weight, but the roof above seemed more stable in that part of the building. We sat down on what was left of a wooden bench, once bolted into the hallway wall, but now cracked and sagging. It should have been a moment to collect ourselves. But then we heard it, a low, slow scraping sound coming from above us, not animal-like. It was deliberate, like nails or claws dragged across sheet metal. It moved from left to right and back again, then stopped. We stared at the ceiling, flashlights aimed upward, though the boards were thick enough to block any clear view. No one spoke for a full minute. Finally, Caleb stood up and muttered, "Okay, that's enough rest." But before we could move, we heard it again. This time closer. That slow, steady scrape. I swear it knew we were listening. It didn't try to hide. If anything, it wanted us to hear. We rushed out of that hallway and ended up in what had once been the art room. The smell of old paint still clung faintly to the air, mixing with mildew and rot. Canvases leaned against the walls, covered in mold and dark spots. One was flipped backward, and for some reason Sasha insisted on turning it over. The image painted on the canvas was faded, but I'll never forget it. 4 faceless figures standing around an open hatch. Not a door, a hatch. The brush strokes were rough, almost childlike, and smeared in places like someone had tried to wipe it clean, but given up. "That's weird, right?" she said, trying to laugh. No one responded. We all knew it wasn't just weird. It was too close, too specific. No one else was in the building. That painting looked old, decades at least, but there it was. 4 figures, like us, staring into the floor. And the hatch in the image looked exactly like the one we'd found earlier. Same angle, same latch, same rusted corners. Looking back though, we should have left right then. That was the moment where everything inside me screamed to run. But Caleb shook his head and said we were just freaking ourselves out, that the building was probably used by squatters over the years, and maybe someone painted that as a joke, but I could tell he didn't believe it. His hands wouldn't stop fidgeting with the camcorder, which was still dead. He kept pressing the power button anyway. We stayed in that room for maybe 30 minutes. At some point, we turned off our flashlights to save batteries and sat in near total darkness, with only the moonlight slipping through broken windows. That's when we heard the whisper. Not a whine, not a building creak. An actual whisper. It came from the doorway, soft, female, impossible to make out, but definitely there. I don't remember getting up, but suddenly we were all standing, flashlights back on, pointed toward the hall. No one was there. The air smelled different, sharp and metallic, like something had just been carved open. Caleb suggested we start heading back toward the front, not because he admitted fear, but because we had enough footage. It was a weak excuse, but none of us argued. We started retracing our steps, but the hallways had changed. I know how that sounds. I know buildings can feel like mazes when you're scared and in the dark, but this was different. The hallway with the mural was gone. The staircase we used to come up was sealed off with collapsed boards that hadn't been there before. We turned left, then right, then circled back and ended up at the same art room, twice. It wasn't until the 3rd time that Caleb said, "It's like it doesn't want us to leave." I wanted to argue, to tell him it was just old building layout confusion, but my lips wouldn't form the words. We were being moved, funneled, not by hands, but by the space itself, by something that lived inside the place Hollow Pines had become. We should have been more careful when we found our way back to the supply closet. That's where the hatch waited, still locked, still silent, like a wound sealed too tightly, and yet, somehow, it didn't feel like we were returning to it. It felt like it had been pulling us back the entire time. I noticed it before anyone said anything out loud. The hallway we took to get there wasn't the one we remembered. The walls had different stains. The graffiti we laughed at earlier, the one that said "he's still down there," was now smeared out, as if someone had tried to rub it off with bare hands. Caleb walked over to the hatch with a weird look on his face, not scared, not curious. Resigned, maybe, like he knew it had to happen. Without saying a word, he reached into his hoodie pockets and pulled out a small brass key, a completely different shape than the one we used for the main door. He held it up, avoiding eye contact, and muttered, "I found it earlier, thought it was for a filing cabinet or something." Then he knelt down and fit it into the hatch's padlock like he'd done it before. I didn't know what to say, none of us did. Sasha just stared at him, wide-eyed, as the lock clicked open with a soft, wet sound, like the rust had turned to something softer over the years. Caleb avoided all our questions. He didn't look surprised when the latch gave way. He didn't flinch when the hatch creaked open and revealed the wooden staircase below, swallowed by blackness, so thick our flashlights barely pierced it. That's when it hit me. Caleb had been here before. I asked him directly, my voice shaking, "When did you come here?" He said nothing for a long time. Then he whispered, "I had a brother. His name was Eli. He disappeared when we were kids. I think he came here. None of us knew how to respond to that. It didn't sound like a confession. It sounded like a memory that had been waiting to claw its way out 4 years. We stood there in silence, staring at the open hatch, the smell rising from it sharp and cold, like wet soil and something older, something buried too long. Against every instinct I had left, we started down the stairs. They groaned under our weight, but held. The air grew colder with each step. My flashlight flickered the deeper we went, and I kept thinking about my missing phone and Sasha's necklace. All the things this building had taken, little by little, like tolls for entry. The staircase led to a small corridor, lined with cracked hull walls and pipes, that looked like they hadn't carried water in decades. At the end was a room, and inside that room was the truth. It wasn't big. It looked like it used to be a storage cellar. Low ceiling, broken shelves, old filing boxes stacked in uneven piles. Some were soaked through, some burned around the edges, but there were no spiders, no rats, no dust thick enough to cover the footprints already there. We weren't the first ones to come down. Caleb stepped forward and turned over one of the boxes. Dozens of Polaroid photographs spilled across the floor, yellowing and cracked. We started picking them up, each more twisted than the last. They were of children, dozens, maybe hundreds. Some blurry, some taken mid-movement. Others posed in front of the very same mural we'd seen earlier. A few were taken in rooms we had just walked through, and in one, I saw someone who looked exactly like Sasha. Same hair, same coat, same expression. I dropped it and backed away, heart pounding in my throat. That photo looked old. It had the same washed out coloring as the rest, but Sasha was standing in it. Caleb found a notebook wedged between the pipes in the corner. He flipped through it quickly, his face draining of color with each page. Then he passed it to me without a word. The handwriting was tight, cramped, desperate. Whoever had written it had done so with shaking hands. One entry stood out. The children can't leave. They remember too much. We made sure they forget, but sometimes the building doesn't let them go. It keeps what we can't. There was more, but the ink had bled through. I could barely hold the book. It felt wrong in my hands, like it was alive. That's when we heard it. The sound of something moving above us. Heavy footsteps, slow and scraping, as if someone was dragging a limp body through the hole above the hatch. The light flickered again. Sasha dropped her flashlight and it cracked, going dark. Caleb looked like he was going to throw up. He backed toward the stairs, nearly tripping. "We need to go," he said, but no one moved. Will had walked to the far wall, where something was carved into the concrete with fingernails or something sharper. It was one sentence, repeated over and over. We were never alone. I grabbed Caleb and yanked him toward the stairs. Sasha followed, but Will hesitated. He just stood there, eyes locked on the carvings. I shouted for him to come, but he didn't move until something groaned behind the wall, loud, wet, and hungry. That finally snapped him out of it. He bolted, flashlight bouncing wildly in his hands. We flew up the stairs 2 steps at a time, slipping, scraping our palms, choking on the air that suddenly smelled like sulfur and blood. When we slammed the hatch shut behind us, the lock was gone. Just gone. We pushed a broken filing cabinet over it instead, then ran, not even pretending to act brave anymore. But Hollow Pines wasn't finished with us yet. We didn't stop running until we reached the north stairwell, the one we'd come in through earlier. But even that didn't feel safe anymore. Everything looked the same, but also completely different. The paint on the walls seemed darker, warped like it had been melted and smeared by a handprint that wasn't quite human. I kept blinking, convinced it was a trick of the flashlight beam, but the lines were too deliberate. They curled and looped and ended in crude symbols that hadn't been there before. This wasn't just an old place anymore. It was awake, it knew us, and it didn't want us to leave Sasha was crying. She wasn't making noise, but tears streamed down her face as she gripped my sleeve with fingers so cold they barely felt human. Caleb was pale and shaking, his camera swinging from his wrist like a dead weight. Will kept looking back, whispering to himself in a low voice that didn't sound like anything I'd heard from him before. I heard him say Eli's name, Caleb's missing brother, again and again, almost like he was praying. I think that's what made Caleb snap. He turned and shoved Will, shouting, "Don't say his name." It was the first time I'd ever seen him truly afraid. That's when we heard the front door open. Not creak, not splinter, but open, with a clean, solid groan of rusted hinges. For one horrifying second, we all froze, thinking the building had opened it for something to come in. But then we heard footsteps, fast ones, and a beam of white light swept down the hallway, cutting through the shadows. A man's voice called out, sharp and angry, "Who's in here? You're trespassing." I couldn't believe it. Someone real had entered Hollow Pines. It was a cop. Not a rookie, older, worn, probably near retirement. He had a flashlight in one hand and a gun holstered at his side. When he saw us, he stopped dead. We must have looked like hell, covered in dust, shaking, eyes wide with terror. He frowned and said something into the walkie on his shoulder. We tried to explain, all talking at once, but none of it made sense. Caleb shouted about photos and the basement. Sasha kept repeating that we hadn't touched anything, and I remember trying to describe the hatch, but losing the words before they reached my mouth. To his credit, the officer didn't dismiss US, not entirely, but his tone shifted, less accusatory, more cautious. "All right," he said slowly, glancing around the hall. "Let's get out of here. You can explain everything outside." We nodded, more than willing. But when he turned to lead us out, he stopped in his tracks. The main door, the one we heard open, the one he walked through, was now shut, completely. He tried the handle, locked. He yanked on it, hard. It didn't budge. His voice dropped into something low and muttered. "This wasn't locked a second ago." We followed him as he moved quickly, retracing the path he'd taken in. But the corridors had changed again. We passed the same twisted staircase 3 times. His flashlight began flickering, and so did ours. Sasha's had already died, and now mine sputtered every few seconds, casting strange, distorted shadows on the walls that didn't match our movements. One of them lingered a beat too long, stretching along the wall like it was reaching for us. The officer turned and barked, "Stay close. Don't stop moving." But I think even he knew something was deeply, deeply wrong. When we reached what was once the East Hall, the floor was wet, not from leaks, but with something darker, something that smelled like rust and meat. I nearly slipped, catching myself on a broken chair. The officer scanned the hallway ahead and raised his voice again. "If someone's messing with us, this ends now." But there was no reply, no footsteps, no echo. Just a long, dreadful silence that wrapped around us like a noose. Then came the sound from behind us. A single, deep thud, like something massive had fallen onto the floor, or had jumped down from the ceiling. The kind of sound that stops your heart cold, because it doesn't follow any human rhythm. The officer turned, gun now drawn. What the hell was that? No one answered. We didn't need to. We all felt it. Something had come up from the basement. Something that hadn't been whole for a very long time. We ran. Not a smart, controlled run. A blind, panic sprint through corridors that had started to curl in on themselves like a maze made of breath and rotting wood. Lights overhead sparked and popped, and something huge moved in the dark behind us, always just out of view, but close enough to feel. The air grew hot, wet, and choking. My legs felt like they were pushing through syrup, every step harder than the last. When we finally burst through a broken window in the rear hall, we didn't even stop to look back. We hit the ground hard, rolled into the wet grass, and kept crawling until we reached the fence. Sasha screamed when she saw that her arm was bleeding, not a scrape, but a long, deep gash that looked almost intentional, like fingers had dug in and pulled downward. The officer pulled out his radio again, hand shaking, and called for backup. His voice cracked halfway through the report. We didn't talk on the way to the hospital. No one had the energy. I remember staring at my hands, realizing they were covered in soot and something else, something that smelled like burning hair and pennies. I didn't know if it was mine. All I knew was that whatever lived in Hollow Pines didn't want to be forgotten. And it definitely wasn't finished with us. The police never figured out what happened that night. Officially, it was ruled as unauthorized trespassing and accidental injury inside a condemned property. They said the collapsing structure was responsible for the noises, that we panicked and caused our own injuries while trying to flee. The photos gone, the notebook missing. Caleb swore he left it with the officer, but when the report was filed, nothing was listed in evidence. They chalked it up to miscommunication. Or maybe someone decided it was better not to have those things on record. Either way, Hollow Pines was sealed for demolition. Then a week later, they tore it down without warning, and none of us were allowed back on the grounds. We went our separate ways after that. Sasha moved across the country and didn't say goodbye. Will stopped answering texts. Caleb, he changed the most. His face got thinner, darker around the eyes, and he wouldn't talk about what we saw in the basement. He dropped out of school a few months later. I heard from someone that he started sleeping in his car, convinced something was watching him at night. He never said what. I think he already knew. As for me, I did what people do when they're scared. I tried to forget. I deleted the photos I'd taken that night, burned the clothes I wore, stopped looking at basements altogether. But you can't unsee what we found down there. You can't scrub the sound of those footsteps from your memory, no matter how many years pass. And I told myself, maybe if I stayed quiet, it would forget me too. Maybe it had only wanted Caleb. Maybe the rest of us were just witnesses. But I was wrong. Last week, I got an email from an address I didn't recognize. No subject line, no message body, just one photo attachment. I didn't want to open it. My hands were shaking before I even clicked. But of course, I did. You would too. It was grainy and low resolution, like it had been scanned from an old print. In it, 4 teenagers stood in front of a cracked mirror. 3 boys, 1 girl. We were covered in dust. I was in the center, holding a flashlight. Sasha was smiling, faintly. Will looked distant. Caleb's face was turned toward the camera, eyes wide, mouth slightly open like he'd just seen something. It was us. But I swear we never took that photo, not once. And behind us, in the reflection, was a 5th figure, just a shadow, tall and thin. Its hand pressed flat against the glass like it was trying to reach through. It wasn't there in the actual room, I'm sure of it. But in the photo, it's watching us, right there with us, like it belonged in that moment. Like it always had. Since then, I've been hearing things. At night, mostly, soft scraping, sounds in the walls, whispers in the vents near my bed. My phone goes missing 4 hours at a time, then reappears in the exact spot I left it. Sometimes with the battery dead, sometimes with pictures I never took in the photo roll, blurry shots of my bedroom taken while I was asleep. The worst part, last night, when I went to plug in my charger, I noticed a small, black smudge on the inside of my closet door. When I looked closer, I saw 4 words scratched into the paint beneath it. We were never alone. That's when it hit me. It didn't stay in Hollow Pines. We didn't leave it behind. We brought it with us. Or maybe it chose to come. I don't know what it wants. I don't know if it ever wanted anything besides being seen. But now that we've seen it, it doesn't want to be forgotten. Not ever again. I haven't slept in 2 days. I hear someone walking in the basement every night. Even though I live in an apartment building with no lower floor, the scraping always starts around 2:14 a.m., the exact time we open the hatch. I keep thinking about Caleb's brother, about the names in that notebook, the photos on the floor. I keep thinking about the carving on the wall. We were never alone. Maybe we still aren't. If you've ever broken into someplace abandoned, some school, church, asylum, or boarded up house, if you've ever laughed and said, "This place is creepy," then left without thinking twice, check your camera roll. Look in the dark corners of your photos. Pay attention to what's missing from your backpack. And if you hear whispering tonight, don't answer. Whatever's down there, it listens. I should have walked away when I saw the posting. It was taped to the wall in a 24-hour laundromat, yellowed at the edges, like it had been up 4 years. Night security, no experience needed, $28 an hour, room provided. I didn't have to think hard about it. I'd been out of work for almost 6 months, rent was overdue. I was eating dollar store canned soup and sleeping on an air mattress that deflated a little more every night. At the time, it had felt like a gift. Looking back though, I should have known better. Anything that quiet, that generous, is never just a job. The call came 2 days after I left my name on the number tag. A man with a smooth voice, no name, asked if I could come in that night. No interview, no paperwork, just an address and a note. Arrive by 6:30 p.m. Late arrivals will be locked out. That was the first warning sign I ignored. Still, I was too tired, too broke, and too desperate to ask questions. I filled my backpack with a flashlight, extra socks, and the paperback I'd read twice already. I figured if nothing else, I'd have a roof over my head for the night. I didn't know yet how true, and how dangerous, that assumption would turn out to be. The building sat about 15 minutes outside town, past the industrial district and into a patch of land that didn't seem to belong to any map. There were no businesses nearby, no signs, no address plaques, just a massive concrete cube rising out of a dead field, 4 stories tall, completely windowless. The only sign was a small, rusted number nailed to the steel front door. 9. No company name. No lights, no cameras. I stood in front of it for a full minute before knocking, even though I'd been told not to. No one answered. I reached for the handle, and it opened before I could touch it. That should have been the second sign. Inside, the air smelled sterile, not clean, but hollow, like the scent of long-unused ductwork. The lobby was lit by a single flickering bulb, and an old desk phone sat unplugged on the front counter. A man in a grey uniform stepped out of a side room. No name tag, no smile. He looked me over once and handed me a laminated card. "Level 2, he said. 3rd floor. Stay there unless instructed." I asked him about the duties, if I'd be walking patrols or watching cameras. He said, "You'll see. Just read the rules and don't leave your level." That was all. Then he was gone, like he'd never been there at all. There was a list of rules taped to the inside of the stairwell door, printed on a fading sheet of thermal paper, 10 items, the usual no smoking and no guests. But then it got stranger. Rule 6 said, if the hallway is shorter than it was, do not approach the end door. Rule 9 warned, do not respond to your own voice if it calls from another room. And Rule 10, at the very bottom, read simply, there is no 4th floor. I read that one twice. The building had 4 visible stories. I counted them again from the parking lot. I had seen 4, but Rule 10 was printed like it was the most important one, like it was a reminder, or a threat. When I reached level 2, the floor was empty, no desks, no offices. Just a long corridor lined with identical doors, all shut, all unmarked, except for one at the very end painted matte black. That door was padlocked. I wasn't given a key, and I didn't ask. I found a chair in the middle of the hallway with a bottle of water and another copy of the rules folded neatly on the seat. I sat. The overhead lights buzzed faintly, and the air didn't move. There were no vents, no hum of machines, just silence so heavy it pressed on my skin. I told myself I'd get used to it, that it was just a weird job. But the longer I sat there, the more I felt like I'd stepped into something built not for people, but to keep something else in. That was my first shift. Nothing happened, not really. But by sunrise, I was shaking. My palms were raw from gripping the arms of that plastic chair. I didn't drink the water. I didn't use the restroom. I didn't move once, except to flinch every time the black door made a sound. It creaked once around 3 a.m., like wood swelling in heat. Except it was metal. And it was freezing. I checked my watch. The minute hand spun like it couldn't settle. I didn't understand it yet. But the building wasn't a workplace. It was a ritual. A place with rules. Not because of safety, but because something inside needed them followed. I came back the next night, even though everything in me said not to. I needed the money. And, stupid as it sounds, part of me needed to prove I wasn't scared. I convinced myself the silence, the weird rules, the creaking black door. It was just atmosphere. Some old military facility with leftover Cold War paranoia. I figured if I stayed calm and followed the instructions, I'd be fine. Still, when I pulled into the empty lot and saw the number 9 catching the last light of dusk, something inside me sank. It didn't feel like a job anymore. It felt like an agreement I couldn't take back. This time, the door didn't open on its own. I had to push hard, like the air inside was pressing against it. The same man from before was at the desk. I asked him his name. He said, "Doesn't matter. We don't talk here, unless we have to." He slid a clipboard across the desk with a list of floor assignments. 3 other names were scrawled in block letters, all assigned to level 3. I asked why I was the only one on level 2. He didn't answer, just circled my name and said, "If you hear them above you, don't look up." Then he handed me a headset, radio, and waved me toward the stairs. On my way up, I passed level 1, just a short hallway with concrete walls and a single red bulb hanging from a wire. No doors, just that light. I don't know why, but I held my breath as I passed it, like the air wasn't safe. Level 2 was exactly as I remembered, long, symmetrical, to quiet. But someone had left me a thermos of black coffee this time, still warm. The note next to it read, "Keep your hands visible between 2 o'clock and 3 a.m. No matter what you hear." That was Rule 11, apparently. A new one, a hidden one. It wasn't printed on the wall. Someone wanted me to know, but not officially. That scared me more than if it had just been another rule taped up in plain sight. Around 1:30 a.m., the radio crackled. It wasn't a voice at first, just a sound like someone breathing against a microphone. Then a whisper, low and calm. "Door 6 is open." I stood, looked down the hall. All doors were closed. I told myself it was a mistake. But when I blinked, one of them, the 6 from the elevator, stood open just a crack. I hadn't heard it move. I hadn't seen it swing, but it was open now. I stared at it for 10 minutes without moving. Then the radio spoke again. This time, it was a man's voice, different from the one at the desk. "If it's open, leave it open. If it closes by itself, start counting backward from 10. If you reach 4, run." That was all. I never reached 4. The door stayed open for the rest of the night. But I swear something was watching me from the dark sliver between the hinges. I couldn't see movement, but I felt weight, like a thought I wasn't thinking was pressing against the edge of my mind. When the shift ended, I ran down the stairs and found the front desk empty. No man, no clipboard, just a plain white envelope sitting in the center of the counter. Inside was a cash voucher, unmarked, and another rule written by hand: "Don't look at your reflection in the elevator glass after 3:10. That night, after I got home, I turned every mirror to face the wall. I unplugged my TV, my phone, Even the microwave, anything with a surface that could reflect. I didn't know what would happen if I broke the rules outside of Building 9, but I didn't want to find out. I woke up around 3:12 a.m. anyway. No alarms, no noise, just the feeling of being watched. My bedroom window, facing a 4-story fire escape, had a faint handprint in the fogged glass, too long to be mine, too far up for anyone to reach. The next shift was already waiting in my voicemail when I checked. No voice, just the building's address. That's how it always came after that. No schedule, no confirmation, just a time. And the number 9. That's when it hit me. This wasn't a job. It was a service, a sacrifice. We weren't gods. We were instructions. Pieces of a pattern repeated every night to keep something inside the building quiet. And now I was part of it, whether I understood it or not. By the 4th night, I knew I wasn't working in a normal building. The term security meant nothing. There were no intruders, no keys, no logs. Just that endless hallway on level 2. Always empty, always cold. I tried asking the man at the front desk for more context. I even offered to take a pay cut if he'd just tell me what we were guarding. He didn't laugh. He didn't even blink. He just said, "We're not guarding anything. We're participating." That word stuck with me. Participating. Like this whole job was a ritual, not a role. Like we were reenacting something over and over, not to understand it, but to keep it still. I started writing the rules down in a notebook, not just the ones printed on the walls, but the ones I heard whispered over the radio or found scribbled in the corners of stairwell doors. Rule 14. If you hear water dripping, but the floor is dry, don't answer your name. Rule 17. If someone knocks twice on the vending machine, unplug it immediately. That one hit me hard, because I'd heard that knock nights earlier, and didn't do anything. Now I couldn't stop wondering what would have happened if I had responded, or worse, looked to see who was knocking. On my 5th shift, something new happened. The lights went out on level 2 at exactly 2:06 a.m. Not all at once, but one by one, from the far end of the hallway, as if something were walking slowly toward me, flipping them off with each step. I sat frozen in my chair, clutching the rule sheet, waiting to see if anything else would happen. Then the final light above me flickered once, twice, and died. For 30 full seconds, I was in total darkness. Then I heard breathing, not near me, but all around, as if the walls were lungs. I started whispering the rules out loud, like a mantra. Don't answer your name. Don't move. Don't look up. When the lights came back on, the hallway was unchanged. But the black door had moved. It was 6 inches closer. I reported the light outage to the front desk, hoping it might lead to a conversation, anything that could explain what was going on. The man behind the desk just checked a box on his clipboard and muttered, "That happens when someone breaks a step." I asked what a step meant. He looked me straight in the eye and said, "Think of this place like a clock. Every shift resets it. Every mistake moves the hand. If we hit midnight, the door opens. Nobody wants that." Then he walked away, leaving me with a dozen more questions and no answers. Later that night, one of the other guards from level 3 came down to my floor. He looked pale, sweating, and said he needed to rest. I told him he wasn't supposed to leave his level. He looked at me with this hollow kind of dread and said, "I think I broke one." He wouldn't explain. He just sat on the floor and started counting backwards from 10. Over and over, always stopping at 4. When I offered him water, he slapped it out of my hand and screamed. No liquids after sound. Before curling into himself, I backed away slowly, radioed it in, and was told to return to my station. I don't know what happened to him. The next night, his name wasn't on the list. I noticed that every time something went wrong, a new rule appeared, like the building was adapting, or worse, remembering. Rule 23 showed up after that night. Level 3 is not a refuge. Movement between floors is discouraged. I stopped asking why. The more I looked for logic, the more it unraveled. Some rules contradicted others. One said to keep lights on at all times. Another warned against drawing attention with light during specific hours. I started to suspect the rules weren't instructions at all. They were bindings, chants, not meant to guide us, but to hold something in place. If you followed them well enough, you survived. If you didn't, the building noticed. I began hearing things outside my designated shift. Static on the radio in my car. Faint banging behind walls in my apartment. Once, I picked up a fast food bag and inside was a napkin with Rule 7 written on it in shaky handwriting. If the hallway shortens, it's not for you. That was the first time I thought about quitting. But something stopped me. Not fear of losing the job, but fear of what would happen if I wasn't there one night. If the routine broke. If someone less careful replaced me. The rules felt like they were stitched into my skin now. And any break in the cycle would tear something open. Something that had been waiting. I met Gloria on my 6th shift. Or, rather, she made sure I saw her. She was already sitting at the bottom of the stairwell when I came in. Smoking a cigarette she kept hidden behind her cuff. Level 1, she asked, without looking at me. I said no. Level 2. She nodded like that meant something. Good. Don't ever volunteer to trade. I didn't even know we could. She didn't smile or introduce herself, just stood and said, if they offer you floor 0, you say no. Even if they promise a raise. Even if they promise a door out. Then she walked away. That was it. No context. Just a statement like a curse. And something in her voice told me it wasn't a metaphor. Later that night, after my shift, I waited outside the building just to see if she'd come back. She did. Hours after the sun rose, pale as chalk and limping slightly. She didn't speak right away, just leaned against the hood of her car and lit another cigarette. This place remembers you, she said finally. It knows who follows the rules and who makes it up as they go. The ones who last are the ones who stop asking questions. I asked how long she'd worked here. She laughed, but it wasn't amused. I've quit 3 times, she said. Moved out of state once. But I still woke up one night with the address written on my arm, in Sharpie. My own handwriting. I tried to press her for more, but she shook her head. The more you try to figure it out, the more it learns about you. Don't give it that. She tapped the side of her head. Thinking patterns, not meaning. This place doesn't care why. It only cares what and when. Like a clock. And clocks don't love you back. With that, she peeled off in a rust-colored hatchback and left me standing in the dirt lot, holding a thermos of untouched coffee that had somehow gone cold in less than 5 minutes. Inside, the air felt thicker. The front desk guy, I had started calling him Tower in my notes, handed me a manila envelope that just said review. Inside was a cassette tape and a map of level 2, annotated in red. A new door was circled. I asked what the tape was. He said, "That's you, from last week. Listen before midnight." I didn't know whether to feel disturbed or impressed. I hadn't seen a single camera on the floor, and yet here was audio of my shift. When I played it back in my car, I heard myself breathing, shifting in my chair, humming the same tune I always did when nervous. Then, halfway through the tape, a second voice whispered my name. Not like a ghost, like it knew me, like it was proud. I tried asking another worker on level 3 if he'd heard anything like that. He was younger, maybe early 20s, and clearly on edge. His eyes darted toward the elevator every few seconds. "Don't ask it questions," he hissed. "That's the trick. The second you ask what something is, it shows you, not all at once, not with teeth. It just starts living in your head." I asked him how long he'd been working here. He looked confused. "This week," he said. I think that was the moment I realized no one here knew for sure how long they'd been on staff. The building blurred time, stretched it, or erased it when it became inconvenient. I began noticing tiny changes in the hallways. Door hinges slightly, more rusted than the night before, chairs facing the wrong direction. A candy wrapper I swear I threw away showing up perfectly folded on my desk again. At first, I assumed it was my memory, sleep deprivation, but the others confirmed it too. Gloria told me, the building forgets things that aren't useful. Sometimes that includes parts of you. Best to keep a journal. Even if you don't remember writing it, at least there's proof you did. I started keeping mine in my boot, wrapped in foil, along with a photo of myself and my brother, just in case I stopped remembering who I was. The worst moment came that same week, when the stairwell door to level 4 was left unlocked. No one claimed to open it. No one admitted to going up, but by the next shift, the black door on level 2 had changed. The padlock was gone, replaced by a chain, newer, tighter, humming with a low buzz like a wasp nest. Tower didn't mention it. No one did. But that night, all radios stayed silent, and we were told not to move from our stations under any condition. At 3:33 a.m., every light in the building flickered once, and somewhere above us, something let out a long, hot exhale that didn't end for 30 full seconds. We all heard it, and we never spoke of it again. The truth didn't come from a manual or a speech from Tower. It came from a locked drawer in the supply room I wasn't supposed to enter. That night, level 2 had flooded, not with water, but with fog, thick and low, hugging the ground. Like dry ice, there was no source. The vents were cold. The air smelled faintly of burnt pine. Tower radioed in, relocate to maintenance until further notice. I obeyed, but maintenance was unguarded. No lights, just rows of shelves and rusted metal cabinets. That's where I found it, an old drawer wrapped in copper wire, sealed with wax that cracked at my touch. Inside were 5 VHS tapes labeled by date, none more recent than 1998. And a folder of photos. The folder showed a different version of the building, one with windows, with workers smiling in front of the entrance like it was just another office complex. Then the changes began. The next photos were grainier, more rushed, rooms emptied, doors welded shut, warning signs appeared in foreign languages. The final image was dated September 7th, 1998. It showed level 4. That floor wasn't supposed to exist. The photo was blurry, taken through a glass pane, maybe a monitor or observation room. At the center stood a figure, tall, hunched, wrong. Not just deformed, unfinished. As if it hadn't decided what it wanted to be yet, but it was looking, at the camera, through the glass, through the years, straight at me. I took one tape back to my car, labeled shift breach minus 1994. The building didn't have a player, but I still had an old combo TV in storage from college. It took nearly an hour to get it running. When I pressed play, the screen flickered with static before settling on grainy black and white footage. The camera pointed down level 2, same as mine, but older. The lights were dimmer, the chair was smaller. A man paced nervously, checking his watch. The timestamp read to 47 a.m. Then something passed behind him, a blur of static shaped like a person. He didn't react at first, but then he stopped, turned around, and answered it. He said, "Yeah," like it had called his name. That's when everything stopped. The lights, the camera, even the tape. The screen froze on his face, wide-eyed, slack-jawed, mouth just starting to open in a scream. I unplugged the TV. That image burned into my vision for hours. I confronted Tower the next night. I told him what I'd found. He didn't deny it. He just leaned forward and said, "This place is older than you. Older than me. Older than the cement poured around it. You don't understand the job, because you're not supposed to. We don't guard the building. We host it." I asked him what it was. He didn't answer. Just looked down the hall toward the black door and whispered something that used to be outside. That was the first time I truly understood the rules weren't about safety, they were containment. Instructions left behind by people who survived long enough to write them down. I learned more from Gloria. She met me at a diner off Route 12, halfway between shifts. Her hands shook as she poured cream into her coffee. "The building isn't a place," she said. "It's a rhythm. Something with a heartbeat. We just built around it. Thought we could box it in with walls and steel and rituals. And maybe we did, for a while. But it's not asleep anymore." She handed me a napkin with 2 numbers on it, 9 and 4, circled. "Don't go higher, ever. And if you hear someone call you from below, run, because it means someone else broke their rules, and it's coming to test yours next." The next shift felt different. The hall smelled faintly of dust and cinnamon, like a forgotten attic. The chair was missing. So was the rule sheet. I stood for 2 hours before the radio clicked on. Just static. And a single word spoken in a voice I'd never heard before. "Trade, that's all." But I knew what it meant. Someone else had slipped. Somewhere. Someone had answered the wrong voice or opened the wrong door. And now the building was adjusting, rebalancing. It wanted me to move floors. But I didn't. I stayed exactly where I was. My knees ached, my back burned, but I stayed. Because that's what the rules demanded. That's when it hit me. The building doesn't need to trick you. It just waits for you to question the logic. One slip, one thought that says, maybe that rule is just superstition. And that's when it sees you. That's when it starts crafting a version of itself just for you. Custom-built horror in the shape of your doubts. It doesn't break in. It invites itself through the cracks you make in your belief. I left that shift without speaking. Didn't even look at Tower. I just walked past the front desk, into the cold morning, and felt something behind me smiling. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I gave my notice 2 days after that last shift. Not officially, of course. There was no HR, no phone number, no exit form. I just stopped showing up. Ignored the silent voicemails, changed my number, moved in with my cousin in another state for a few weeks. It felt childish at first, like I was running away from a scary story. But the silence that followed didn't feel like peace. It felt like breath being held, a pause. Something waiting, not gone. I should have felt free, but all I felt was the weight of unfinished ritual, like I had left something unlocked, and now it was pacing behind the walls of my life. The dreams started a week later. At first they were easy to ignore, flashes of long hallways, broken light fixtures, doors that breathed. But then came the voices, familiar ones. My mother, my old roommate, my childhood dentist, all calling my name from behind walls. I'd wake up to scratching sounds inside the air vents, not mice, not rats, something with intention, with rhythm. One night, I came home to find the word restart carved into the condensation on my bathroom mirror. Not with a finger, but with something sharp. I lived alone. My cousin was out of town. And the lock on the door was untouched. I checked online forums, message boards, anything that might give me a lead on what I'd been part of. That's when I found references to similar buildings. Places without names, locations with no official listing. Threads with cryptic titles, like Shift Protocols or Facility 9 and Echoes. Most were dead, a few had been deleted entirely. But one post chilled me. You can leave the building, but you can't take your ears with you. It speaks through familiar sound now. That's how it hunts. I slammed my laptop shut and unplugged it. The next day, my Bluetooth speaker started playing that same hum I only ever heard in the stairwell, the sound of lights dying one by one. I thought about burning the rule book I'd started, tossing it in a fireplace, burying the ashes. But something stopped me. Not fear, exactly, but obligation. Like destroying it would only erase my place in the system, not the system itself. And without my part played, the pattern would twist. Someone else would pay. Maybe a new hire. Someone like me, who thought they were just taking a quiet job to pay rent. If I broke the link, I wouldn't be freeing myself. I'd just be pushing the weight onto another back. The building wasn't just watching, it was waiting. The next package arrived without a return address. Just a box on my doorstep, wrapped in black tape. Inside was a thermos, my thermos, the same one I'd left in the chair on my final shift, still warm to the touch. I didn't open it. I threw it in a dumpster 6 blocks away. When I got home, it was on my kitchen table. The chair was too, same model, same position. I hadn't brought it inside. I hadn't touched a thing. But there it was, a perfect reconstruction of my post at level 2. Down to the exact length of hallway visible through my front door, which now wouldn't close all the way. The next time I looked in the mirror, I noticed a small smudge at the corner of my right eye. I wiped it, but it didn't go away. I got closer. It wasn't dirt, it was movement. A hallway, faint, almost imperceptible, but real. Behind the reflection of my pupil, I could see it, the lights of level 2, flickering slowly, one by one. I turned away, heart pounding. When I looked back, it was gone. But that night, I heard footsteps on my roof, steady, heavy, like someone pacing the exact rhythm of a patrol. I didn't sleep. I didn't even blink 4 hours. I just sat in bed, waiting for a shift that had never really ended. They made it clear that this was never about employment. It was a bargain, a task in exchange for silence. For the illusion of control, you don't quit the job. You just delay the next shift. And the longer you stay away, the more it sends reminders. They start small, missing time, repeating dreams, voices you know saying words they've never spoken. Then it gets bold, recreating the rules in your own home, finding new surfaces to etch warnings into. I've stopped checking my voicemail entirely. Every message is just static now, broken by one word: count. Always count, backward, down from 10, and never, ever reach 4. I decided to end it on my own terms. I'd read enough, heard enough from Gloria and the others. There had to be a way to break the pattern, to close the door from the outside. The building was just stone and wire and darkened corridors, right? It only had the power we gave it, the belief, the repetition. If I stopped playing my part, maybe the pattern would collapse, maybe it would all stop. That's what I told myself when I packed a duffel with lighters, bolt cutters, and a pry bar, and drove out to Building 9 one last time. No shift notice, no call, just me and the thought that fire might succeed where obedience failed. The lot was empty when I arrived, as always, but the front door was already open, swinging slightly on its hinges, like it had been waiting for me. I stepped inside and didn't sign in. I didn't wait at the desk. I walked straight to the stairwell, past level 1, and into the humming quiet of level 2. No lights this time, just a hum. The long hallway seemed longer than usual, stretching into a dimness that didn't recede no matter how far I walked. My old chair sat in the center, facing the black door. On it was my journal, the one I'd burned in my cousin's fireplace weeks ago. I didn't pick it up. I didn't need to. I knew what it said. I walked to the black door and laid the bolt cutters against the chain. The hum grew louder, warbling like a throat learning how to sing. I paused, breathing hard. Then I did something I hadn't done before. I spoke, not to tower, not to the building, to whatever was inside. You don't own me, I said. You're just a shape in a room, a rule book without a reason. There was a moment of silence, so deep it rang in my ears like pressure at the bottom of the ocean. Then something behind the door moved, not toward me, but upward. And the hum changed. It sounded pleased. I'd made contact. That was my mistake. The chain snapped without resistance. The bolt cutters clanged to the floor, and I stepped back, waiting for some great gust of air or burst of light. But nothing came. The door didn't even open. It simply faded, like steam on glass, revealing not a room, but a mirror, not of me, but of my apartment, my kitchen table, my boots by the front door. My reflection stepped into frame and smiled. I didn't. The whole way behind me was gone now, replaced by the exact layout of my home. This wasn't teleportation. It was replacement, substitution. The building wasn't where I worked. It was me. It was becoming me. And I just let it in. I ran. Back through the stairwell, past the levels that now pulsed with a dim red glow. I passed Tower at the desk, only now his eyes were empty, not blind, just vacant, like someone had pressed pause on his thoughts. I shouted his name. He didn't blink, just whispered, "You made a copy. You always were going to." I don't remember how I got outside. The next thing I knew, I was back in my car, the duffel bag gone, my hands covered in black dust. Not soot, not ash, something thicker, like powdered bone. And on my dashboard was the old cassette tape, cracked, but still intact, labeled, "Last Day." At home, I tried to destroy everything. I smashed the speaker, poured bleach on the mirror, scrubbed every surface with steel wool until my hands bled. But every time I looked away, something returned. A rule etched in soap on the bathroom sink, a hallway visible behind the microwave, reflection, a second coat on the inside of the closet, darker than the first, still wet. I left the apartment that night and never returned. I still see it sometimes, on street corners, reflected in windows. The building shows up like a half-remembered dream, leaning into the world through cracks in routine. I thought the consequences were only mine, but 2 weeks later, my cousin went missing. The police said there were no signs of forced entry, just a black thermos on the counter, and a single phrase written across her fridge in red marker. "Shift transfer complete." I should have known. I'd broken the rules. I'd walked out without sealing the pattern, without finishing the night. The debt had to be paid, and she was the closest match. Since then, I've never stayed in one place more than a week. I keep my phone off, no mirrors, no recordings. But it doesn't matter, the shifts still find me. Even here, even now. It's been 11 months since I last stepped foot inside Building 9, or whatever's left of it. I say that because part of me still isn't sure the building is real in the way a hospital or gas station is. It doesn't stay in one place, and it doesn't behave like brick and mortar should. I've moved 5 times, changed my name once. I use cash for everything. No photos, no social media, no receipts. I don't tell people where I'm going or why. Because the building doesn't need doors to find you. It finds you in repetition, in routines. That's how it snuck in to begin with, through the quiet hum of a shift. A job I thought was simple. Just stay awake, just follow the rules. I've come to understand something I wish I hadn't. The building doesn't care if you believe in it. In fact, belief makes things worse. It feeds on recognition. It blossoms in the space between "I'm not sure" and "what if." The rules, they're not commands, they're symptoms, clues left behind by others like me. People who stared too long into a hallway that wasn't supposed to be there and forgot how to look away. Sometimes I get emails with no sender, just subject lines that say "return confirmed" or "shift unfilled." I delete them. But then I find copies in my sock drawer, on receipts. One time, even carved into a piece of toast. I stopped eating bread after that. I think about my cousin a lot. Her voice used to be the background hum of my childhood, steady, grounded, reliable. Now, sometimes I hear her whispering at night through the air vent above my bed. I've tried everything, sealed it with tape, slept in my car. I even moved to a place with no central air, but still, around to 33 a.m., the temperature drops, and I swear I hear the creak of her footsteps, always one floor above me, no matter where I go. I left her a note before I disappeared. I hope she never found it. I hope she never had to understand. what it meant to be the second choice offering. There are others out there, I know that now. Sometimes, if you're listening on the right frequency, you'll hear them. Late night radio stations with no caller ID, broadcasting static broken up by whispered numbers. 9, 4, 2. The sequence changes nightly. It's how they warn each other. We're not survivors, not really. We're just placeholders, stand-ins, until the building decides what version of itself it wants next. It's never finished building. That's the part that scares me most. It's growing, shifting, trying new shapes. Maybe next time it won't be a building at all. Maybe it'll be a phone app, a customer service line, a dream that comes back too often. Looking back though, I should have walked away the second I saw the first rule. No job with that many restrictions should ever feel safe. I should have known when the chair was already warm, when the lights knew when to flicker, when the coffee machine only brewed at 2:06 a.m. exactly. But I was broke, alone, tired. I told myself I could do one night, then one more, and then it wasn't a job anymore. It was a pattern, and patterns are hard to break once you start dancing to them. I didn't apply to Building 9. It found me. It finds everyone eventually. If you're hearing this, reading it, dreaming it, picking it up on a signal you thought was just background static, then you're already too close. You've noticed it. You've seen the rhythm. Maybe just a flicker, a shadow behind, a door that should be locked, a hallway that seems longer than it used to be, a rule you don't remember writing, stuck to your fridge. If that's true, I'm sorry. I don't have a fix, no cure. Just advice. Don't ask it questions. Don't try to understand the pattern. Play your part, count backward. And if you ever hear your name spoken from a room that's supposed to be empty, whatever you do, don't answer. When my grandfather died, I didn't cry. I know how that sounds, but we were never close, not really. He was one of those men who looked like they were made of splinters and secrets. Always sharp in his opinions, quiet in a way that felt calculated. He lived alone in a falling apart house on the edge of the woods. The kind of place kids dared each other to throw rocks at on Halloween. My mom never brought us around much. She said he was hard to be around. That's all she ever offered. But he was still family. So when he passed, I was the one who got the house, not my older sister, not my mother, me. A house I hadn't set foot in since I was 12. The will didn't offer much explanation, just a handwritten note tucked between the legalese, signed in my grandfather's jagged handwriting. To the one who still dreams in that language, the house is yours. You'll know what to do. I had no idea what he meant, I thought. Maybe it was some poetic nonsense, or a mistranslation. But the lawyer said it was binding, and there was no contest. I owned a crumbling farmhouse now. I almost sold it right away. I should have, but something in me hesitated. Maybe it was the way my mother's face tightened when I told her I was going to visit it. She didn't tell me not to, but she didn't ask me to stay safe either. She just said, "Don't open anything that's already been nailed shut." Then she hung up. The place was worse than I remembered. The paint had blistered off the front in huge strips, like skin sloughing after a burn. The windows were clouded with grime, and the yard was overtaken by a thicket of thorny brush. The porch groaned when I stepped on it, as if protesting my weight. But the door opened easily, no keys needed. The lock had long since rusted to uselessness. Inside, the air was stale, thick with dust and something faintly metallic. The living room looked untouched for decades. Heavy drapes, threadbare furniture, an old record player sitting silent in the corner. The odd thing was, the place wasn't completely abandoned. There were signs someone had been there recently. A mug in the sink, a stack of newspapers from only a few months ago, a coil of fresh extension cord beside the hallway. It didn't make sense. My grandfather had supposedly lived without power 4 years. When I flipped the breaker, I didn't expect anything to happen, but the lights flickered, then came on, dim, but alive. I stood in that moment, surrounded by furniture that had outlived 2 generations, and felt something I couldn't explain. Not comfort, not nostalgia, just awareness, like the house was watching me back. I should have known better than to spend the night. I told myself I was just too tired to drive back. That one night would be fine. I rolled out a sleeping bag in the old upstairs bedroom, the one with the tiny window and built-in shelves carved with strange swirling patterns. I assumed they were just decorative, the kind of eccentric detail you see in old houses. I would learn later that they weren't decorative at all. But that first night, I just lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the house shift and breathe the way old homes do. Except, at 2:46 a.m., I heard knocking. 3 knocks, from inside the wall. I woke up stiff and disoriented. The kind of groggy, where you forget where you are, until the silence reminds you that upstairs room was heavy with stillness, not peaceful, but thick, like sound didn't move right inside it. I had to shake off the strange dream I'd had, something about my grandfather pacing behind the walls, whispering a lullaby in a language I couldn't place, but still somehow understood. I didn't remember the words, just the feeling. Like being led somewhere I didn't want to go, but couldn't refuse. I chalked it up to sleeping in an old house full of mold and bad insulation. But even then, I didn't believe myself. After a lukewarm cup of gas station coffee, I decided to start sorting through the house. There were trunks in the attic, old filing cabinets in the den, and boxes stuffed under beds and inside closets, all filled with an unsettling mix of the mundane and the strange. Dozens of hand-labeled cassette tapes, each dated, but with no titles. Dried herbs bound in string and tucked into drawers, like forgotten talismans. Books with modules scribbled in that same jagged handwriting from the will. Some of the notes were in English, but others were in symbols I didn't recognize, spindly, looping, like the letters were trying to twist away from being read. In the far corner of the basement, I found something that gave me a chill I couldn't shake. There was a small cabinet bolted into the concrete wall, padlocked shut. Beside it was a wooden stool, worn smooth at the edges from use, as if someone had sat there often, for long periods, staring at the cabinet, watching it, guarding it. I didn't have a key, so I left it alone for the moment, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Why lock a box inside a house no one visits? Why sit next to it 4 hours like you're afraid it might do something? It didn't make sense, unless the box wasn't meant to keep something in, but something out. Back upstairs, I started looking through the study. That's where I found the journal. It was tucked behind the radiator, wrapped in wax paper. The leather cover was cracked and smelled faintly of oil. Inside, the entries were sparse, more like fragmented thoughts than full paragraphs. But one phrase kept coming up, written again and again in the margins. The eye sees what it remembers. Below one of those entries, in different ink, was a single sentence that made my breath hitch. Do not teach the house your name. I didn't understand what that meant at the time, but the feeling it gave me, like being whispered to in a locked room, stayed with me all day. That evening, as I was organizing the lower kitchen drawers, I found a map, hand-drawn, creased and worn, with lines that traced not the house itself, but something beneath it, a hidden layout, like tunnels or crawl spaces, with small X marks and numbers scrawled beside them. One of them was directly beneath the master bedroom. Another one matched the corner of the cellar, where the locked cabinet was bolted, and one was right under the front porch. There were arrows on the map, but they didn't show paths. They showed movement, flow, as if something had once traveled under this house, something that moved often enough to be charted. I folded the map and put it in my pocket, though I didn't know why. Maybe I was afraid it would vanish if I left it behind. Or maybe I was already beginning to understand that this house hadn't just been my grandfather's prison. It had been his project, his obsession, maybe even his partner. because later that night, as I passed by one of the upstairs bookshelves, I noticed something I hadn't seen before, a series of tally marks, etched into the wood with a sharp tool, hundreds of them, lined up in careful columns, and just beneath, the last line, the start of a new set, only 3 marks in. Like someone had started counting again. The first real sign that the house was reacting to me came on the 4th night. I had gone back down to the basement, standing once more in front of that bolted cabinet in the far corner. I wasn't brave enough to try forcing it open, but I sat on the old stool and stared at it for a long time, wondering what it was hiding. I didn't say anything out loud, just let my thoughts wander. But as I stood to leave, I noticed something carved into the cement at my feet, fresh, still crumbling at the edges. 3 words, still listening, always. The handwriting matched. The journal, but I hadn't seen it there before. And I was certain, completely certain, that it hadn't been there the day before. That was when the dreams started to change. They'd been strange before, flashes of things I couldn't remember upon waking. But now they followed me through the day, echoing in my peripheral vision. I'd see flashes of my grandfather pacing the upstairs hallway, speaking in that same impossible language, but now I recognized my own name mixed in. Sometimes I'd hear it during the day, whispered from vents or drifting in through closed windows, never angry, always calm, but too clear to be the wind. And every time I responded, even just a quiet what, something in the house would shift. A drawer would open, a bulb would flicker. Once, a door that had always been jammed swung open effortlessly, like it was answering. The most disturbing moment came one morning when I found an envelope sitting on the kitchen table. Plain white, no stamp. Inside was a photo. Not old, new, taken from behind me. In it, I was sitting on the basement stall, looking at the cabinet, the back of my head perfectly in frame. The light in the image was coming from a source I hadn't brought down with me. I didn't even need to check the timestamp. I knew I had been alone. I hadn't told anyone I was there. There was no electricity in the basement beyond the single bulb above the washer. And yet the photo existed, tucked neatly into an envelope I hadn't seen the night before. I started noticing more changes in the house, not just in the things, but in the layout. The floorboards in the upstairs hallway began creaking in new patterns, not from wear, but rhythm, as if something was pacing a specific route, back and forth. I tried walking in time with the creaks once, and they stopped completely. Dead silent, but when I stopped moving, the creaking resumed. Out of sync, on its own. I began marking each sound on a notepad. I didn't know why. Some part of me felt like I needed to keep track, not of the sound, but of whatever was making it. As if the house needed me to notice, to bear witness. That night, I woke to find my closet door open. I always kept it shut. The hinges were warped and hard to move. But now it stood wide, and inside it was something I hadn't placed there. The photo, the one from the basement. It was pinned to the inside of the closet door with a long iron nail. Not a thumbtack, a nail, thick and dark with rust, driven in hard enough to split the wood. I didn't scream. I didn't touch it. I just closed the door and pushed a dresser in front of it. Not because I thought it would help, but because it gave me something to do besides panic. The next morning, I found a note from my mother. Not a new one, an old letter, crumpled and yellowed, wedged between 2 floorboards under the bed. In it, she wrote about being a child in the house, hearing voices, being told to keep quiet about the watchers. She mentioned my grandfather locking himself in the basement for entire weekends, chanting in strange syllables and refusing to eat. At the end of the letter, she wrote, "If you ever go back, don't say your full name out loud. Not even once. That's when they learn it. That's when it begins." I didn't want to stay in the house anymore, but I couldn't leave either. It felt like walking out would be unfinished somehow, like I'd started a conversation and turning away would invite something worse than just answers. so I started looking for whatever scraps of truth I could find. I drove to the county archive downtown, pretending I was just a curious heir. The woman behind the counter barely glanced at me as I requested anything tied to my grandfather's property. She pulled a file folders from a drawer that looked untouched in years. The records were brittle and yellowed, but inside I found permits, some official, some oddly vague, for structural adjustments never completed, dated decades apart, notes about sealed units, oral disturbance management, and a denied request to import material from Arkham Township, which I later discovered doesn't exist on any state map. Even stranger was a page tucked behind the others, a report labeled Survey of Threshold Sound Events, signed only with initials I couldn't trace. It mentioned my grandfather by name and referred to him not as a resident, but as a custodian. One sentence was underlined twice. The subject has stabilized the anomaly using lineage-based buffering. Continuity is required. I sat with that for a long time. The words didn't make literal sense, but the implication was clear. My grandfather hadn't just lived in that house. He'd been holding something there, keeping it dormant or distracted, maybe even fed back at the house. I returned to the cassette tapes I'd found earlier. Most of them were blank or warped, but one of them, dated August 1978, played clearly. My grandfather's voice, flat and without emotion, listing phrases in that same strange language I'd heard in my dreams. At first, it was just repetition, but then he began inserting English words: containment, restless, do not reply. His voice cracked near the end, and I heard something in the background, not static, not feedback. It was breathing, labored, wet, slow, as if something was in the room with him while he recorded. I ejected the tape and locked it in a drawer. I haven't played it since. I called my mother. I didn't think she'd answer, but she did. When I told her where I was, there was a long silence on the other end. Finally, she said, "You've stayed too long." It knows now. I asked her what it was, what grandfather had been doing. She refused to explain. Just told me that her father had once tried to burn the house down when she was a child. Said the fire didn't spread. Said the walls stayed cool, no matter how much kerosene he poured. That's when the nightmares started for her, she claimed. He said it was hungry, and it liked to watch, she whispered, just before hanging up again. I don't know what disturbed me more, that she remembered all this and never told me, or that part of me didn't feel surprised. I started to believe that maybe I had known, somewhere deep in my blood, the dreams, the language that felt half familiar, the way the floorboards groaned when I stepped in certain places, like the house was waiting. One of the books I found in the attic had a section labeled air tethers. It described rituals passed through bloodlines, not spells, exactly, but roles, duties, the idea that some families weren't chosen, but created to hold things in place. Things older than maps, older than names, things that recognized flesh and remembered voices. I realized I'd been marked the moment I walked back into the house, maybe even before, maybe the moment I agreed to take the property. Something had attached. Not a ghost, not a curse, something colder, smarter, a presence that learned me in pieces, watching how I slept, what I touched, what I ignored. And now it knew I was searching. It knew I was close. Because that night, when I opened the basement door again, the cabinet wasn't locked anymore. The padlock sat on the floor, broken cleanly in half, the cabinet doors wide open, and inside was something wrapped in cloth, pulsing faintly with heat, something breathing. When I touched the cloth-wrapped object inside the cabinet, I expected cold stone or maybe metal. But it was warm, damp, even, and it moved slightly beneath my fingers, just once, like something inside had shifted in its sleep. I dropped it and stepped back, my breath catching in my throat. The cloth had symbols stitched into it, not printed, done by hand in thick black thread. I didn't recognize the characters, but they reminded me of the ones in my grandfather's journal, the ones that seemed to resist being looked at for too long. I didn't unwrap it. I couldn't. I knew, somehow, that doing so would be like breaking the surface of water and falling into something I'd never escape. So I left it there and closed the cabinet. Though the lock was gone and the doors no longer latched, the thing had been released. Or maybe it had let itself be found. After that, everything got worse. Time stopped behaving normally in the house. I would wake in the middle of the night to total silence, check my watch, and find it frozen at 3:33 a.m. The stove clock would match. My phone wouldn't turn on. Then, without warning, all the clocks would skip forward. Hours gone, chunks of time missing. I'd find food in the microwave I didn't remember making. Once I woke with mud on my hands and dried blood under my nails. No memory of leaving the bedroom. The worst part was that I didn't feel surprised. I was starting to expect things like that, as if my mind had already started surrendering pieces of itself to make space for something else. I stopped trusting reflections. The mirrors no longer showed just me. At first, it was subtle. My mouth would move slightly after I stopped speaking, or I'd be blinking in the reflection while holding my eyes open. But then it got worse. One morning, I passed the mirror in the upstairs hall and saw a figure behind me, tall, narrow, with no face. I turned quickly, nothing there, but when I looked back, the mirror still showed it. Standing closer, I covered that mirror with a sheet. It stayed covered for 2 days, until I came home from the library and found the sheet folded neatly beside it, as if to say, "That's not yours to hide." I started having trouble remembering where I'd placed things. Objects vanished from drawers only to show up in strange places. My toothbrush in the freezer, a hammer balanced perfectly on top of a lampshade, a voice recorder left in the fireplace with a fresh tape inside. That recorder still gives me chills. When I played it, I heard myself speaking, not recently, but as a child. My voice, age 7 maybe, whispering, "He's behind the wall. Don't say his name." I dropped the recorder and nearly broke it in half. I didn't remember ever saying that, but it sounded exactly like me, and it wasn't just a voice. There was a faint heartbeat in the background. I hadn't told anyone where I was staying, not specifically, but someone left a package on the front steps. No label, no postage. Inside was a book, not old, but bound like it should have been. Rough leather, hand-stitched. The cover blank except for a symbol etched into it with something sharp. The same symbol carved into the basement door frame. The book was filled with dates, names, and short entries, a kind of family record, except the names weren't people I recognized. They were more like ... offerings, first names only, followed by notes like held 3 days, or not suitable, eyes wrong. One name was circled in red, mine. I tried to leave after that. Packed a bag, started the car, got halfway down the driveway, and woke up in the living room. Not metaphorically, literally. I blinked and I was standing by the fireplace, jacket half zipped, keys still in hand. My car was parked exactly where I'd left it, engine cold. I hadn't imagined the attempt. But something had brought me back, or refused to let me go. I started to understand that I was no longer staying at the house. I had become part of it. Each day I stayed, the lines blurred more. I forgot where I'd put things. Then I started forgetting conversations. Dreams bled into waking hours. My voice began to sound strange to me, like someone was imitating it from a few seconds behind. The only clear moment came late one night when I found my grandfather's voice on another cassette, one I hadn't seen before. His tone was broken, tired, almost pleading. He said, "If you're hearing this, it's already in you. The house doesn't pick, it waits, and it waits for blood it recognizes." He paused, and I swear I heard him crying, softly. Then he added, "Don't try to fix it. Just keep it quiet." That's all we ever were. Keepers of the silence. The tape ended with a sound I'll never forget. It wasn't static, it was breathing, not human, not animal, just wrong. Long, rattling breaths, like something remembering how to mimic us. The morning after I tried to leave and woke up standing in my own living room, I panicked. Not just fear, panic in the real, clinical sense. Cold sweat, tunnel vision, heart racing so hard I couldn't hear anything over it. I ran outside, barefoot, and tried calling my sister from the edge of the woods, as far from the house as I could go without losing sight of it. I got through on the third try. The moment she answered, I felt my stomach turn, not because of anything she said, but because I heard something else on the line. A slow, sucking sound, like something breathing through a wet cloth. She kept asking if I was okay, but I couldn't say anything. I just hung up. I didn't want her to hear what I was hearing. I didn't want her involved. I decided the house had to be destroyed. No more stalling. I filled a metal canister with gas from the shed and soaked the baseboards, the kitchen, and the base of the stairs. I opened every window, made sure the doors were wide. I lit a match and dropped it on the soaked floor just inside the front hall. Nothing, not even smoke. The match fizzled out on the wood like I dropped it in water. I tried again, 3 more times, from different angles. No flame caught. The wood felt dry to the touch, but the fire refused to take. Even the gas seemed to lose its scent the moment I poured it. The house wouldn't burn. Or maybe it had learned how not to. I went back inside with a Bible I'd pulled from my grandfather's bookshelf, old, the spine cracked, a ribbon marker stained deep red. I wasn't religious, but I read out loud anyway, reciting passages like they were instructions, not prayer. The house didn't flinch. The lights didn't flicker. But every few seconds, I'd lose my place, like the words were shifting on the page just slightly. I blinked hard and tried to keep going, but my voice began to echo, just slightly offbeat, as if someone in another room was speaking along with me, a half second behind, mimicking me like a child, trying to learn a new sound. That's when I dropped the book. I couldn't keep pretending I had any control here. In one last grasp at clarity, I tried sleeping outside. I dragged my sleeping bag onto the overgrown lawn and stayed just under the stars, hoping that fresh air might give me a break, that some natural distance would insulate me. It worked, for about an hour. Then the whispering started. Soft at first, like a breeze through the grass, but it sharpened as I drifted closer to sleep. The voices weren't random, they were mine. My voice, retelling pieces of my childhood, conversations I'd forgotten. One was me telling my mom, at age 5, that the wallman smiled at me again. I hadn't remembered that moment until the voice said it, and then I knew it had happened. Which meant ... it had always been watching. Desperation drove me back to the basement. I stared at the object I'd refused to unwrap. Still pulsing, still warm. I considered burying it, driving it miles away and sinking it into a lake. But deep down, I knew none of that would matter. It didn't belong to the house belonged to it. My grandfather had tried everything too. The more I read from his journals, the clearer it became. He had spent 40 years trying to contain it, not kill it. He'd learned early on that damage only made it curious, that it studied aggression and returned it magnified. He once spent 3 days hiding in the attic after attempting to wall off one of the crawl spaces. His notes from those days were nothing but scratch marks and words in languages I don't know how to read. My final idea was simple: forget, deny, starve it of attention. I moved all the furniture back where it belonged, stopped reading the notes, turned off the recorder. I treated the house like any old inheritance, dusty, inconvenient, something to be cleaned and forgotten. For 2 days, nothing happened. No noises, no reflections, no breathing behind walls. I started to believe it was working. Then I found the message scrawled into the frost on the inside of the bathroom mirror one morning. You knew me first. That was it. No threats, no commands, just a reminder. I started crying and didn't stop for hours. Because it was right. I'd always known the dreams. The whispers behind wallpaper as a child. The reason I never liked sleeping with my back to a wall. My grandfather hadn't left me the house because of guilt or inheritance. He left it because I was next. I was part of the pattern, a continuation. The house didn't need a new owner. It needed a voice, a watcher, a host. And I had walked willingly into that role the moment I unlocked the door. I did leave eventually, not in the dramatic, movie-style blaze of fire or a screaming sprint into the woods, just slowly. Quietly, I packed up a few things, locked the front door behind me, and drove away like it was any other day. The air felt different when I crossed county lines, lighter, warmer, more grounded somehow. I even convinced myself I was free for a little while. I moved in with a friend across the state, got a job at a second-hand bookstore, grew my beard out, ate better, slept with the lights off. I started feeling human again, but deep down, I knew it hadn't let go. It started with small things, that strange static buzz when I walked past certain vents or narrow hallways, like the pressure shifted just slightly. My phone would occasionally open the voice memo app on its own. Once it recorded for 3 hours in the middle of the night. I listened back, all silence, except near the end, a soft tapping, like fingernails on wood, followed by a slow inhale, before the file cut out. The place I was staying in had no wood panels, no vents, no reason for that sound to exist, but I recognized it. I'd heard it 100 times beneath the floorboards of my grandfather's house. I don't dream anymore, or if I do, I don't remember them. I wake up tired in a way that doesn't match my sleep, like I've been doing something all night and just don't know it. And sometimes I catch myself mumbling when I'm alone, not words I know, just fragments, syllables, half-formed sounds that don't feel like mine. One time, I recorded myself out of curiosity and played it back. I counted the number of times I repeated the phrase, not yet, not yet, not yet, 32, always in threes. My grandfather's notebooks were full of patterns of 3. 3 knocks, 3 mirrors, 3 days. I think I've inherited more than just a house. Looking back though, I think the house was never the curse itself. It was a container, a ritual site, something older than land deeds or brick foundations, disguised as a home and passed through bloodlines like a family heirloom. My grandfather hadn't lost control. He'd given it form. Through repetition, through attention, through the daily act of remembering it. That's what fed it. That's what kept it real. And now, even hundreds of miles away, I still remember. I still speak it. I still wake up with my mouth shaped around a name I've never written down, because I know if I do ... someone else might see it. Someone else might read it out loud. And then it's not just mine anymore. A week ago, I got a letter in the mail. No return address, just my name, first, middle, and last, written in the exact handwriting from my grandfather's will. Inside was a photo, old, grainy, black and white. It showed a house I didn't recognize, but in the window was something familiar. Tall, narrow shape, no face. But I knew what it was. I turned the photo over. One sentence was scribbled there. You were doing well. Keep listening. I burned it immediately, but the image still shows up in my mind when I blink too long. I've started keeping a journal, not to understand it, but to give it less room in my head. I write by hand, never digital, and I don't reread what I write. I've caught myself copying the same lines again and again without realizing it, especially late at night. There's one I found circled in red a few days ago. The silence is not empty. It's watching to see who notices. I don't remember writing that, but it sounds like me, and it sounds like him, my grandfather. The house didn't end when I left. It just changed location. It followed the name. It followed the blood. And it's still waiting. It started with a Craigslist post. I know how that sounds, I know, but at the time, it seemed like a gift. I'd just dropped out of college, my credit cards were maxed out, and my roommate had bailed without paying his half of the rent. I was 2 weeks away from being evicted, eating dollar store ramen and counting change to afford gas. So when I saw the listing that said $2,500 for a 3-night stay in historic property, must record video, no pets, light cleanup, I thought it was one of those YouTube stunts, a brand collab, something dumb, maybe even fake. But still, I clicked, because when you're broke and desperate, your standards shift fast. The listing was bare bones, just an address, a few grainy exterior shots of a huge Victorian house that looked like it had been pulled from the opening credits of a horror movie, and a vague set of instructions: stay inside from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. Keep a camera running. Report any structural damage. Leave a note every morning with your impressions. The weirdest part was the name of the company, Opal and Finch Historical Trust, which sounded too proper, too fancy, to be offering side cash jobs through Craigslist. But when I looked them up, the name had just enough of a digital footprint to seem real. Not polished, not professional, just real enough to ignore the red flags. I texted my friend Chloe that night. She'd been filming low-budget haunted house walkthroughs for years and had a decent following online. If anyone could make something out of this, it was her. She was skeptical at first, even more than me, but after a few hours of digging, she called me with an edge of excitement in her voice. It's a real house, she said. Been abandoned since 1983. No one's lived there since the fire. And get this, no one's allowed to buy the property. It's state protected. That should have been my first cue to back off, but instead I asked, "You in?" She didn't hesitate. "Hell yes. If we don't die, we'll go viral." Chloe brought her boyfriend Mason and their mutual friend Tyler, a guy who filmed weddings on the weekends and worked IT during the week. I didn't know him well, but I'd seen his drone work online and figured he'd help make everything look slick. The plan was simple: arrive Friday afternoon, film everything, survive 3 nights, and leave Sunday morning with $2,500 each, wired directly from the trust. They even sent a contract, not a sketchy one either, a real PDF with signature lines, disclosure forms, and a clause about non-disruption of site integrity, which none of us really understood, but laughed about anyway. We signed it. We sent it back. Within an hour, we each got a Venmo deposit for $250 as an advance. It felt too easy, too clean. We drove up Friday morning in Chloe's battered Subaru, loaded with gear, GoPros, 2 slurs, 3 tripods, batteries, backup batteries, SD cards, headlamps, and a box of snacks that Mason insisted on bringing, like we were going camping. I didn't say it out loud, but I was nervous. More than nervous, actually. The kind of dread that lives low in your stomach and only rises when your brain catches up to what your instincts already know. That everyone else was excited, especially Chloe. She kept filming little intro clips, narrating our spooky staycation, and joking about bringing a Ouija board. Mason laughed. Tyler mostly stayed quiet. He had that polite, analytical energy, always watching, always adjusting settings. I remember thinking that, if anything went wrong, at least he would stay calm. The house was in upstate New York, buried deep in the woods off a gravel road that felt like it hadn't been used in years. When we pulled up the long, sloping driveway, the trees opened just enough to reveal it, tall, grey, half-eaten by ivy. Its top floor windows boarded over with mismatched planks. It didn't look haunted. It looked forgotten, like it had been dropped here and left to rot in silence. The porch sagged. The roof was bent in the middle. A single door hung slightly ajar, and someone, maybe from the trust, had placed a small welcome mat in front of it that said simply, "We appreciate your time." Chloe laughed when she saw it. I didn't. We were supposed to arrive before 5 p.m. That was in the instructions. No entering the property after sundown. When we stepped inside, the light had already turned amber. The front room smelled like old wood, mothballs, and something faintly metallic. There was dust, sure, but not as much as you'd expect. Like someone had done a half-hearted job cleaning, just enough to make it look untouched. In the center of the room was a white envelope. Placed on a small side table, it was waiting. Inside were 4 plastic name badges, with our names already printed on them, and a short, tight letter that read, "Welcome. Your presence is valuable. You are observed, not interfered with. Leave the lights on. Do not open the cellar. Thank you. Opal and Finch Historical Trust." I looked at Chloe. She smiled, but her hands were already shaking. That's when it really hit me. Whatever this was, it had already begun. The first hour in the house was surprisingly calm. No cold spots, no mysterious voices, no slamming doors. Just the 4 of us unpacking gear, setting up cameras, and cracking jokes about what kind of antique ghosts we might meet. Mason found a working light switch in the front hall and flipped it on. To our surprise, the chandelier above us blinked once, then flooded the space in a yellow glow. We laughed in relief. Electricity was running. That alone made everything feel less threatening. For a moment, it didn't feel like a horror story. It felt like a weird Airbnb with bad lighting and too many creaky floorboards. The house was big, bigger than it looked from the outside. It had 4 floors, including the attic and a small basement. The stairs were solid, but groaned with every step. The second floor had 3 bedrooms, each with furniture that looked original to the 1960s. Thick, wooden dressers, cracked mirrors, floral wallpaper faded into beige. There was one master bedroom on the 3rd floor, larger than the others, with dark green curtains and a view of the woods behind the house. Chloe claimed that room almost immediately. "Best light," she said, filming a slow pan with her phone. But I noticed the windows were nailed shut from the inside. When I pointed it out, she just shrugged. Old house stuff. We decided to sleep on the 2nd floor together, just to stay close. Tyler took the room across the hall and started setting up camera angles with eerie precision, marking spots with painter's tape, and adjusting tripod legs millimeter by millimeter. He treated the entire house like a film set, which helped make things feel manageable. We'd rigged 2 cameras in the front hall, one in the kitchen, and one outside the main bedroom. We didn't film the basement. We hadn't even opened that door yet. The note had said not to, and none of us felt like testing that rule on the first night. At dinner, we sat on the dusty floor of the main parlor, eating sandwiches from a cooler and talking about what we'd found. Chloe mentioned there were no light switches in the upstairs hallway, none at all, as if the wiring had been removed or never installed. Mason said there were no clocks in the entire house. I hadn't noticed until then, but it was true. Every wall where a clock should have hung had an outline, a dust-free circle, or a lighter paint ring, but nothing was there. No tick, no time, just absence. I tried not to read too much into it. Old houses are weird. They're full of drafts and creaks and unexplainable quirks, but there was something about the silence between our conversations that unsettled me. When no one was speaking, the air felt too quiet. Not peaceful, pressurized, like the house was holding its breath, waiting for us to say something wrong. I started humming while we unpacked just to fill the space, and Chloe joined in without being asked, like she felt the same thing. Before bed, we filled out the required notes. It was part of the deal. Write down your impressions at the end of each day. Seal them in the envelope and leave it on the front table before sunrise. The trust had been clear about that, so we did. I wrote about the layout, the working electricity, the general lack of danger. I didn't mention the windows being nailed shut. I didn't mention the basement door. Mason drew a little sketch of the kitchen and signed it with a smiley face. Chloe turned hers in blank, laughing about creating mystery. Tyler's was 4 pages long, We never saw what he wrote. That night, we slept with the lights on. None of us said we would. It just happened. Chloe left her lamp burning. Mason kept the hallway light on, and I let the camera stand by LED blink softly in the dark, just enough to see the corners of the room. I remember lying on my back, listening to the soft hum of electronics, trying to fall asleep. That's when I realized something strange. We'd left one camera running in the kitchen, the one pointed toward the cellar door, and sometime after midnight, I heard the faintest sound from downstairs. A click, like a latch being tested, not opened, just touched. And then ... nothing. I told myself it was the house settling. Or maybe a raccoon had gotten in through a vent. I didn't wake anyone. I didn't want to be the one who jumped at shadows on the first night, but I kept staring at the ceiling, waiting for the noise to come again. It didn't. I finally fell asleep sometime before dawn. But even in sleep, I dreamed of a door that never stayed shut, of someone standing quietly on the other side, listening to us breathe. The next morning felt off from the second I opened my eyes. The light coming through the window was dim, too dim for 8 a.m., and the air in the room was heavy, like it hadn't circulated all night. The strange thing was, I could still hear the camera's little LED ticking, which meant the power was fine. But the temperature in the house had dropped by at least 10 degrees. Chloe was already up when I stepped into the hallway. She looked like she hadn't slept much. Her hair was pulled back, and she was pacing, barefoot, a coffee mug in one hand, and her phone in the other. "Do you remember the kitchen having two doors?" she asked, not looking at me. I didn't understand the question at first. "There's the one to the dining room," I said. "And the basement." She turned to face me. "There's a third one now, and I swear it wasn't there yesterday." We went downstairs, and she pointed to a narrow door near the pantry. Narrow enough to be missed, unless you were really looking. It was closed, paint cracked, the handle stiff with age. I reached for it, but she stopped me. "Don't," she said. "Not yet." She wasn't joking. Chloe could be dramatic, but she wasn't paranoid. If she said something felt wrong, I listened. We walked through the rest of the first floor together, checking the rooms. Something about the layout had changed. The hallway that led to the front room now curved slightly, just enough to make you doubt your own memory. A wall that once held an empty coat hook and had a crooked mirror. We didn't say anything about it, but we both noticed. The house wasn't the same, not completely. Tyler and Mason were already going through footage of the dining room, surrounded by open laptops and tangled charger cables. Tyler had that look again, all calculation, no emotion. "This camera shut off at 12 a.m., he said, pointing to the footage from the kitchen. "No power loss, no storage issue. It just stopped recording." He clicked through the timeline, showing the freeze frame of the cellar door. Then it came back online exactly 10 minutes later, but the angle was different. He tapped the screen. "Look at the floorboards." The tripod moved. Mason leaned in. "No one touched it, right?" Tyler didn't answer. He didn't need to. We all knew none of us had been downstairs since setting it up. We rechecked the tripod. It was still sitting where it should have been, centered, stable, locked in place. But the footage didn't lie. Something had shifted it by almost 2 feet, enough to change the frame, enough to catch the corner of the newly appeared door instead of just the cellar. That's when Tyler looked up and said, "Guys ... This file's metadata says it was edited." His voice was quiet, uncertain. "There's a timecode break. Like someone pulled the file out, messed with it, and put it back. It didn't make sense. The camera had never left the kitchen. The memory card was encrypted, sealed in the unit. No one had touched it, not even to check on battery. But somehow the data showed a digital fingerprint, one that none of us recognized. Chloe said it might have been corrupted, but Tyler disagreed. This wasn't an error. It was changed, like someone removed something. He didn't say what he thought had been removed, and I didn't ask. We spent the rest of the day trying to shrug it off. Mason cooked pasta. We took turns showering with lukewarm water. And we even played a card game in the upstairs hallway for a while just to stay distracted. But under it all, we were watching the walls, watching the corners, watching the places where things had already shifted. That third door near the pantry, still there, still closed, still waiting. No one touched it, not yet. That night, I offered to take first watch. With the cameras, we'd started doing shifts after the weird glitch, not because we were scared, we said, just to be safe. But the truth was, none of us felt comfortable being asleep at the same time anymore. While they slept upstairs, I sat in the front room with the laptop open, flipping between feeds. Nothing for the first hour, just creaking wood and occasional wind against the boards. But around 1:30 a.m., I saw movement in the dining room feed. Not a figure, just the camera itself a swaying. Not enough to fall, just enough to feel ... watched. I checked the hallway feed next. Something had changed. The mirror on the wall, the one Chloe and I had noticed earlier, was now showing an angle that didn't match the hallway. The reflection was of a staircase, one we didn't have. I stood up and walked toward it in real time, just to see if I'd imagined it. But in person, the mirror was blank, dusty, ordinary. On the feed, though, it still showed stairs, a staircase leading down, and for a few seconds, I could swear I saw a hand curl around the bottom railing, long fingers, pale and slow, gripping the post like it was trying to stand. I turned the monitor off and sat in silence for the rest of the night, listening. There were no screams, no knocks, no lights flickering. Just that steady, uncomfortable presence behind every shadow, like the house was stretching, testing its seams, deciding how much further it could go before one of us broke. On the second night, everything finally crossed the line from weird to wrong. We'd been tiptoeing around it all day, ignoring how every camera angle seemed just slightly altered from how we left it, or how the hallway upstairs now had a slant to it we swore wasn't there before. Tyler insisted it was just a structural illusion, old floorboards settling, maybe, but the way he kept rubbing his temples said otherwise. Around 9 p.m., Chloe suggested we do a group stream from the main bedroom, live to her small following. If something happens on camera, at least we'll have witnesses, she joked. We all laughed, but it felt more like a dare than reassurance. We set up in the master bedroom, the one with the boarded windows and the dusty green curtains that no longer quite closed all the way. Mason placed the GoPro on a dresser, while Chloe angled her phone at the bed where we were sitting. She started recording, light ring glowing like a little artificial sun in the gloom. It started out light, Chloe narrating the strangeness of the house, showing the closet with its broken hinges and the room's only mirror, cracked straight down the center. Mason added a joke about ghosts having terrible taste in furniture. It felt almost normal for a moment, until the mirror flickered, not shattered, not moved. It flickered, like a bad video feed. The crack vanished for a second, replaced by a reflection of the four of us that didn't match our movements. It lasted less than 3 seconds, but every one of us saw it. In the reflection, Mason was smiling when he wasn't. I was blinking when my eyes were open. Tyler's mouth moved even though he hadn't spoken. And behind us, something that wasn't there in the room, a shape, not quite a person, not quite anything else, just tall and close. Tyler jumped up first, knocking the ring light to the ground. The screen went black, then flared as it caught the ceiling. Chloe cursed, trying to stop the live feed, while Mason tore the curtain back to check the hallway. It was just a glitch, he said too quickly, some sort of loop. But no one really believed that. Not anymore. I looked back at the mirror. It was just a mirror again, cracked, dull, and smeared with dust. But I couldn't stop thinking about the way our reflections had kept moving, that we'd all gone still. We left the room as a group and decided to stick to the lower floor for the rest of the night. Tyler began checking the footage, muttering about frame analysis and looking for skipped timestamps. I went into the kitchen to grab water, but stopped at the sight of the cellar door. It was cracked open, only about an inch, just enough for the shadows to feel heavier. We hadn't touched it. We'd agreed not to, and I know it had been shut before we went upstairs, because I personally checked it when I made coffee earlier. The lock, the little hook latch near the top, had been undone. Not broken, just lifted. I called for the others. Chloe came first, followed by Mason with one of the DSLRs. Tyler refused to enter the kitchen. I could see him hovering near the hallway, watching the open cellar with wide, unreadable eyes. Mason got within a few feet and aimed the camera. Chloe crouched to look inside. "It's just steps," she said. "Stone steps. I think there's a table, or maybe shelves." She didn't open the door any further. None of us wanted to touch it. Instead, Mason slid a broomstick from the corner and used it to nudge the door shut again. The click when it closed made my skin crawl, not because it sounded loud, but because it sounded deliberate. We barricaded it with a chair. No one said that's what we were doing, but that's what happened. Tyler unplugged the kitchen camera. "It's not worth it," he muttered. "Something's wrong with that feed." I asked what he meant, but he just said, "It's not recording what it's seeing." That didn't make sense, not then. But now I understand he didn't mean it was broken. He meant the footage had started showing something the camera hadn't physically witnessed, like it had gained another set of eyes. That night, we all slept in the same room, the one with the fewest mirrors. Chloe made jokes at first, but her laugh faded quickly. We left the lights on, again, but it didn't matter. At 3:17 a.m., every bulb in the room blew out at once. Not a surge, not a pop, but a low hum followed by total darkness. Then we heard the camera downstairs turn on by itself. Not the beeping startup, the quiet mechanical whir of the zoom. Then a click, like it had taken a picture of something that wasn't us. We didn't sleep after the bulbs blew, not really. We lay in our sleeping bags with the cold pressing in from the hallway, every creak of the floorboards sounding like footsteps. I tried to tell myself it was the wind shifting through the old beams, or the house cooling unevenly overnight, but none of that explained the rhythmic nature of the sounds, slow, deliberate, always stopping right outside the door, but never coming in. Tyler kept one of the DSLRs clutched to his chest like a teddy bear, even though the battery had died hours earlier. No one wanted to check the footage from the cellar camera. Not after what we heard, not after the click. At sunrise, the lights flickered back to life without us touching anything. No breakers flipped, no resets, just a slow hum as the ceiling lamp glowed pale yellow again. It was almost worse than the darkness, that reminder that something was choosing when we could see. Mason went downstairs to make coffee, and that's when we found it. The envelope we'd left on the table the night before, our nightly notes, was gone. In its place was a Polaroid photo, curled at the edges and faintly damp. Chloe picked it up carefully and turned it around. No one said a word. The picture showed the four of us sleeping in the room we'd locked from the inside, taken from above, like someone had been on the ceiling. Tyler immediately started packing. He didn't announce it. He just walked back to his room and began loading cables and memory cards into his duffel bag. His movements clipped and robotic. I followed him, trying to talk him down, but he shook his head. "They watched us sleep," he said. "They want us to know that they watched us sleep." He wouldn't make eye contact, just kept muttering something under his breath that I couldn't fully catch. Something about sight and angles, and they're using our eyes now. That phrase stuck with me. Still does, because that's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Tyler's camera, the one he'd slept with, was recording. The lens cap still on. We checked the feed out of fear, not curiosity. The footage was wrong. It didn't show anything at first, just static. But buried in the flicker, frame by frame, were flashes of rooms in the house that didn't exist. A staircase that led downward forever. A child's bedroom with no door. A sink filled with what looked like feathers. No sound. Just flashes, perfectly synced with Tyler's heartbeat. We know because he had a heart rate monitor on for fun. And the BPM lined up frame for frame. Then came a final clip, only a second long. A word burned into the dust on the kitchen wall, just below the ceiling. Leave. But it wasn't just written. It was carved. We ran downstairs to check. The wall was smooth, no message. But the moment we turned off the camera, we heard something fall. It was a photo frame from the hallway, face down. And inside it, instead of a family portrait or old painting, was that same message, scratched into the backing. Leave. We stopped, trying to rationalize things after that. Even Mason, who had been the most skeptical of us all, was pale and silent. By noon, Tyler had taken his bags to the front door and tried to open it. The knob turned, the latch clicked, but the door refused to open, not stuck, resisting. Like something was holding it shut from the other side. Mason went to try. The back door, same result. Windows wouldn't break. Chloe even threw a flashlight at one. It bounced off like it had hit stone. That's when she said it. The house doesn't want us to leave. It wasn't a scream or a panic. Just a flat statement of fact. And no one argued. Later that day, Mason checked the welcome mat. The one that had greeted us with a polite "we appreciate your time" message. It now read, "We know your faces." The letters weren't printed. They were burned into the fibers. I touched them, just to be sure, still warm. We sat in the kitchen after that, quiet. No one had a plan. We just waited, hoping that sunset wouldn't come. But of course it did, and with it, the air grew dense. The smell of wet wood and ash returned, and in the far hallway, where the mirror had once shown a false reflection, we now saw only blackness, not shadow, not absence of light, depth, like a tunnel had opened. And it was waiting. That night, the house came alive. Not in some dramatic Hollywood sense. There were no exploding windows or walls bleeding, but in that deep, soul-hollowing way that tells you you're being studied, down to your blood. The lights flickered constantly now, not randomly, but in some unseen pattern, like Morse code we couldn't read. The floors creaked even when no one walked. Every mirror now reflected other parts of the house, rooms we hadn't entered, and, worse, things we hadn't seen. A man in a coat too long for his frame standing motionless in the attic. A woman with no eyes pressing her face against a boarded window from inside. None of us could speak without our voices shaking. Even Tyler, who had always prided himself on detachment, just stared at the feed from his laptop like he was waiting to be erased from it. Chloe was the one who finally made a move. "We're going to die here," she said. Not yelling, not whispering, just stating it like math. "Or we get out now. I don't care how." She remembered seeing something in the contract about a site response key, a term none of us had understood before. We tore through the printed papers we'd brought, flipping over every page until we found it, a line buried in the emergency protocol section that read, "In the event of full sensory break or post-cognitive distortion, the site response key is located in the structure's heart." It sounded like nonsense, but Mason said, "the center of the house," and that was enough. We mapped it roughly with our phones, using signal strength and compass apps to guide us like fools with broken tools. The house didn't obey geometry anymore. Hallways turned in loops, staircases shifted underfoot, and some doors opened into closets that had not been there 20 minutes earlier. But eventually we reached it, the dining room, the only space that hadn't changed since the first night. There, nailed to the underside of the table, was a small metal box the size of a jewelry case. Inside, a brass key and a note, no writing, just a drawing of a face, no features, just deep, wide-eye sockets, and a mouth far too large. Underneath, the key was labelled "Basement Release." We didn't want to go down there. That door had been the one constant threat, the line we hadn't crossed, but the house had cornered us. The walls groaned like they were breathing. The cameras had all gone dead. There was no help coming, so we opened it. The cellar stairs went deeper than they should have, far deeper than the house's foundation could support. Cold, damp air rose to meet us, like something exhaling in relief. We went down together, flashlights trembling. At the bottom was a single wooden chair with a hole dug in the earth beside it, perfectly round, lined with cloth. It looked like a cradle or a grave. Sitting in the chair was another photo of us, taken from below. We didn't scream. There was no point. We just ran. Back up the stairs, through the house, toward the front door that had never opened for us. I don't know what did it. Maybe the key, maybe the fact we'd obeyed some unspoken rule. But this time, it gave way. With a groan and a rush of freezing air, the door opened onto the grey light of early morning. We stumbled into the yard, gasping, blinking against a light like we hadn't seen it in years. None of us looked back, not until we were in the car and halfway down the gravel drive. When we did, the house looked gone. Still there, physically, but dimmer somehow. Like it had slipped behind a screen we could no longer touch. We reported nothing. No police, no press. The money had already been wired in full. Chloe deleted the live feed. Tyler burned the footage. Mason wiped the hard drives. We made a silent pact, unspoken and unanimous. Never speak of this again. Not to friends, not to strangers, not even to each other. But silence didn't stop the aftermath. Chloe started having seizures. Mason moved to a different state and changed his name. Tyler disappeared. His apartment was found empty, doors open, no sign of forced entry. All that remained was a note, scrawled on the wall in what looked like charcoal. They record US back. As for me, I still have the contract. I keep it in a locked drawer. Sometimes I take it out and reread the section about site rights and retention terms. It says we agreed to be documented, that our stay would be archived, that our likeness, motion, and sound belong to Opal and Finch Historical Trust in perpetuity. But I've searched for that company 100 times since. The website's gone, their number disconnected. The address leads to a burned-out church that's been abandoned since 1983. There's no record of them, no trace, nothing, and yet, every month, I still receive a receipt, digital, encrypted, time-stamped, title, observation ongoing. I know how ridiculous this is going to sound, but you have to understand, my family has always been like this, strange, private. We don't talk about certain things. Not out of shame, but because we act like they don't exist. I grew up in a rural part of West Virginia, surrounded by hills, silence, and a patch of land that's been in our family since before the Civil War. That land has a barn on it, a barn no one uses, a barn we're never supposed to touch. And every summer, like clockwork, our family would gather for a cleaning. That's what they called it. The cleaning of the West Barn. No one questioned it. Not really. It was just one of those things that hovered around us, like bad weather. Always there, always coming. Growing up, I remember the barn always gave me the creeps. It was massive, older than any building I'd ever seen. Its roof sagging in the middle, like it had been wounded. The doors were padlocked from the outside. 3 thick bolts covered in rust and blackened tape. No one ever explained the tape. No one explained the chicken bones we sometimes found around the base, or the jars half buried in the earth behind it. My cousins and I would dare each other to get closer, to touch the latch or peek through the warped wood, but every time we did, an adult would appear, an uncle, an aunt, sometimes even my mother, and they'd say the same thing. You don't go near the barn. Not until you're ready. Ready for what? I'd asked once. I was 9, maybe 10. My mom looked at me, stone-faced, and just said, "You'll know when it's time." That was the end of the conversation. I thought maybe it was a joke, or some weird tradition meant to keep us in line. Every family has their quirks, right? I told myself that for years. Even when I saw my Uncle Emery smear something black across the barn door one August evening, even when I caught my older cousin Kara carrying a candle into the woods behind it at midnight, I told myself it was just family being weird, until the year I turned 17. That was the summer they finally said I was old enough. It was right after dinner, during one of those suffocating July evenings where the sky hangs low and the air tastes like metal. My grandfather, who barely spoke anymore, looked at me from the end of the porch table and said, "You'll join us this year." He didn't have to explain what he meant, I just knew. My stomach dropped, and I looked to my mom, hoping for some kind of rescue, but she only nodded and said, "It's time," like it was nothing. Like we were talking about washing the truck or setting up the picnic table. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay in the guest room, staring at the ceiling fan spinning, shadows across the ceiling, listening to the sound of jars clinking somewhere outside. My cousin Kara whispered through the wall between our rooms. "Don't mess it up," she said. "The barn doesn't like that." When I asked what she meant, there was no answer. Just silence, thick, knowing silence. I think that's when the fear really started to settle in. This wasn't just weird anymore, this was wrong. And everyone in my family was in on it. The morning of the ritual, I was woken before sunrise by my grandfather's voice at the edge of my bed. He didn't touch me. He didn't even say my name. He just stood there and said, "Get dressed, wear old clothes. You won't be coming back in until it's done." Then he walked out, his footsteps surprisingly light for a man in his 80s. I sat there in the dawnlight for a minute, trying to convince myself this was just a quirky backwards chore, something they used to haze the younger generation. But when I looked outside and saw the rest of my family already gathering in a semicircle around the barn, all silent, all waiting, I knew better. The rules were never written down, but they were burned into everyone's memory like scripture. My cousin Kara went over them with me one last time as we walked barefoot through the wet grass. "You can't speak until the doors are shut behind you," she whispered. "Not unless it speaks first." I stopped walking, thinking she was messing with me, but her face was dead serious. "You carry your own light. If it goes out, you don't ask for help. You don't ever ask for help." Her voice cracked on that last line. I asked her if anyone's light had ever gone out before. She didn't answer. We each had to carry a lantern. Old, dented kerosene things with sooty glass and stiff wicks. Mine had initials carved into the base. LW. I didn't know anyone in the family with those initials. No one answered when I asked. My grandfather poured the oil into each one himself, saying a few words under his breath as he sealed the caps. My mother handed me a handkerchief and told me to tie it around my wrist. "So it knows where you came from," she said, and walked away. The cloth was thin, hand-stitched, with the same symbol I'd seen years ago etched into the barn door, a crooked X with a hooked line underneath. I'd always thought it was graffiti. Before we entered, each of us placed something at the base of the barn, an offering. It had to be personal. Kara dropped a photo. Uncle Emery laid down a silver harmonica. My mother gave a single black feather. I had no idea what I was supposed to leave. No one told me that part. My grandfather handed me a Ziploc bag I hadn't noticed before. Inside was a baby tooth, mine, from years ago. I stared at it, stomach turning. "It has to recognize you," he said softly. "That's the only way it works." I knelt down and left the tooth on the crook step, between the feather and the harmonica, and tried not to gag. Once the offerings were placed, the locks were removed, one by one, starting with the largest padlock. Each latch was opened in silence. The chains were pulled away like dead snakes, rattling against the floor. No one spoke, not even the kids, watching from the porch, holding their parents' hands like they knew better than to ask what was happening. I looked around at my family, people I'd known my entire life, and saw nothing but still faces, eyes empty, jaws tight. They looked like people carrying a weight they couldn't put down. When the last chain fell, my grandfather looked to the sky, still pink with early morning haze, and nodded once. That was our cue. One by one, we stepped through the barn doors. Kara went first, then Uncle Emery, then me. The inside was pitch black, the kind of dark that seems to drink light instead of reflect it. I lit my lantern with trembling fingers, the match catching on the first strike, the flame stuttering as I adjusted the knob. Behind me, the doors creaked shut with a groan that felt personal, like something had sighed as it swallowed us whole. The barn was colder than it should have been. Even in summer, even with 5 of us inside, the air was thick, damp, and carried a smell I still can't describe. Part mold, part iron, part something sweet and rotting. The beams above us creaked gently, but there was no breeze. I held my lantern close and stared into the dark, waiting for someone to explain what came next, but no one spoke. That was the first rule. No sound unless it spoke first. The others began to move, slow and steady, each heading toward one of the barn's corners. I didn't know where to go, so I followed Kara. She pointed to the far stall, the one with the rotting curtain nailed across its entrance, and whispered so softly I almost missed it. "Yours is in there." Inside the stall was a shovel. That's it. Just a shovel and a patch of loose dirt about 4 feet across. I looked back at her, confused, but she was already gone, her lantern bobbing in the distance. I stood there for a long moment, then picked up the shovel and started digging. The dirt was heavy and smelled like rust. My arms shook, not from exhaustion, but from knowing I was digging towards something, even though I didn't know what. Every time the metal edge struck something solid, I paused, waiting, afraid of what I might find. I must have hit 3 rocks before I reached it, a box, old, wooden, wrapped in cloth that shimmered whitely, like it had been soaked in oil or blood. I didn't open it. I wasn't sure if I was supposed to. I just set the shovel down and waited. That's when I heard something move above me. Not a creak, not an animal, but the soft scrape of footsteps along the rafters. Then, for the first time since we'd entered, someone spoke. But it wasn't any of us. It came from behind the curtain. A voice, low, familiar, my voice. It whispered my name like it was tasting it. "Hey," it said. It's been waiting for a long moment. I couldn't move. The voice had come from inside the stall, just behind the curtain. My voice, but distorted, slower, almost like someone trying to mimic me after only hearing me once. I kept staring at that hanging strip of fabric, trying to make out if there was anything behind it, but it didn't sway. It didn't shift. It just waited, like it knew I wouldn't run. My fingers went numb around the lantern's handle. I told myself it was just nerves, that the darkness was playing tricks, or that someone in the family was screwing with me. But deep down, I knew better. That voice wasn't human. It sounded like me, but there was no breath, no throat behind it, just the sound, echoing like a memory from someplace I'd never been. I turned to leave the stall, but my feet didn't move. That's when I saw something in the dirt just behind the box, small, pale, and half buried. I crouched down and brushed it off, expecting it to be another rock or a piece of wood, but it was a tooth. Human, I think, maybe a molar. It still had dried blood in the root. I dropped it and stood up so fast I hit my shoulder on one of the low beams. The lantern swung wildly, casting long shadows that danced and twisted across the wooden walls like they were moving on their own. That was the first time I really felt it. The barn wasn't just old, it was hungry. Kara's voice called from across the barn, "Hold the box to your chest." You have to carry it until the light shifts. Her tone was flat, like she was reading instructions from a manual. I didn't ask what the light meant. I didn't want to know. I picked up the box, still slick with whatever was soaked into the fabric, and hugged it against my ribs. It felt warm, not like room temperature. Warm, like something alive. Something beating slow and steady inside. I pressed my ear to it just once, and I swear I heard breathing. Not steady, not calm, fast and wet, like an animal in pain. The rest of the ritual blurred after that. My job, apparently, was to walk a circle around the inside of the barn, once for every person in the bloodline. I had to whisper their names as I walked, not aloud, not even in a whisper, technically. The rule was to think their names, but hold my breath while doing it. If I breathed or spoke while passing under the west beam, the one directly opposite the entrance, the barn would know I was lying. No one explained what that meant. They didn't need to. The waycarer said it made it feel final. As I walked the circle, the dirt under my feet grew softer, like it had been freshly turned. The smell of iron got stronger, clinging to my clothes, settling into my skin. Each time I passed the west beam, the air got colder. Once, the flame in my lantern dipped, so low I thought it had gone out. But then it sputtered back to life with a soft hiss. I kept my breath shallow, barely moving my chest, repeating names I didn't even know I remembered. Great aunts, dead cousins, even a baby who drowned in a creek years before I was born. I don't know how I knew them, but I did, I said. Them all. And with each step, the box against my chest got heavier. Then something changed. I didn't notice it at first. The shift was subtle. But after the third circle, I realized I couldn't hear the others anymore. No footsteps, no breathing, no light from their lanterns. I turned, heart hammering, and saw that I was completely alone. The stall entrances were gone. The windows had vanished. Even the door behind me had melted into the wall. The barn wasn't just old now. It was sealed, like I'd been swallowed whole. I called out. I know I wasn't supposed to, but the panic broke through before I could stop it. "Kara," I shouted. "Grandpa." My voice came back to me, warped and slow, like it had been chewed on and spit back out by something. To deep in the wood, I spun in place, trying to find any sign of the others, but the space had changed. The shape of it, the feel, it was no longer the inside of a barn. It was a throat, a stomach, something alive and watching. The box began to shake in my arms, not violently, just a slow, sick pulse, like something inside was moving. I gripped it tighter and closed my eyes. That's when I heard it again. My voice, right beside my ear this time. "Put it down," it whispered, "you've done enough." But it wasn't me. It wasn't me. It was what the barn thought I sounded like. I opened my eyes, and there was no one there, but the voice stayed. "We remember you. We remember what you left here. Don't you want to see?" I almost dropped the box. My hands were slick with sweat, and I could feel the heat inside it spreading across my ribs. For a second, I was tempted, not because I believed the voice, but because some part of me recognized it, like it had been inside me the whole time, waiting to be spoken aloud. But then the light shifted, literally. The lantern in my hand changed color, from warm yellow to this sick blue. The air cracked. Something behind me hissed, and I knew I had to run. I didn't run, exactly, not at first. It was more like I stumbled, arms wrapped tight around the box, as I backed away from the direction the voice had come from. But the floor had shifted. The dirt wasn't packed anymore. It was soft, wet, and cold, like walking through compost soaked in cold water. Every step sank just slightly too far, and when I lifted my foot, I felt suction, like the ground didn't want to let go. My lantern flickered again, but the flame never fully died. It just kept dimming whenever I turned in certain directions, as if warning me to avoid them. I started choosing my path by the brightness of the light instead of logic. That's when I knew for sure. The barn was responding to me. Somewhere ahead, I saw movement. A figure, holding a lantern like mine, standing perfectly still just past the east wall. I nearly called out, assuming it was Kara, or maybe Uncle Emery, but I stopped myself just in time. The flame was wrong. To steady, to white, it didn't flicker or glow. It just hovered like a spotlight. Then the figure turned slightly, and I saw that it had no face. Not masked, just blank, smooth skin where features should have been. But it wasn't a dummy or some weird trick of the shadows. It moved. It turned its head toward me, even though there were no eyes, and it knew I was looking. That was the moment I truly understood something had joined the ritual that didn't belong. I backed up slowly, nearly dropping the box. The figure didn't follow, but it didn't leave either. It just stood there, facing me, holding its pale, perfect lantern like it had been doing this for years. I turned and ran, the lantern in my own hand, flickering violently now. And behind me, I heard something drag, like a bare foot sliding through loose soil, slow and deliberate. It never picked up speed. It didn't have to. It knew where I would end up. I finally saw the others again, or at least I thought I did. 4 figures were kneeling in a circle near the far end of the barn, each holding their lanterns, close to the ground. Their heads were bowed, arms stretched toward the center. I recognized my mother's posture, the way she sat when she was praying. I moved closer, whispering her name, but no one looked up. "Mom," I said again, louder now. "We need to go." "Something's wrong." "Nothing." No reaction. I stepped closer, and my lantern flared, not from within, but from the outside, like someone had breathed across the glass. I spun around. Nothing, just the open air of the barn's belly, filled with shadows that breathed on their own. Then I looked back at the figures and noticed the hands. Too many fingers, not just slightly off, completely wrong. Each hand had at least 7 fingers, long and bone-thin, some curled at impossible angles. The skin was stretched, too tight over the bones, and where my mother's wedding ring should have been was a deep black hole, as if the ring had been sucked into her finger. I gasped and stumbled back. That's when they all looked up at once, and none of them had faces either. The box slipped out of my hands. Not dropped, just taken. I didn't feel it fall. One moment it was pressed to my ribs, warm and pulsing. The next it was simply gone. I looked down and my arms were empty. I felt cold instantly, like a part of me had been cut out without a knife. The faceless things around the circle didn't move, but I heard their breathing now, wet, shallow, syncopated, like a chorus of sleeping mouths just about to wake. I turned and ran again, but this time I didn't try to find the others. I just ran toward the direction that felt least wrong. Not right. Nothing in that place felt right, just less wrong. The barn had changed again. The stalls were all sealed shut now, planks nailed up in thick, uneven layers like they were trying to keep something inside. I passed one and heard something pound against the boards from within. Once, twice, then stop. No voice, just that awful pounding, like a head or fist rhythmically meeting wood. At the end of the hall, I saw light again, a real light, warm and flickering. I raced toward it and found Kara, standing by the original entrance, holding her lantern to the door. It was locked, chained shut again, just as it had been before. She was crying, quietly, calmly, like she'd accepted it. "I dropped the box," I said, breathless. "Something's in here with us." Kara didn't answer right away. She just looked down at her own hands. Her fingers were bleeding, not from a cut, from her nails, like they'd been pulled out. One by one, I looked around for the others, but no one else had returned. I asked if she'd seen them. She shook her head slowly, then said something I'll never forget. "It picks someone every year. Someone who brings the wrong thing." I didn't know what she meant at first. Then it hit me. The tooth, the offering. It wasn't given. It had been taken years ago and kept. Maybe that made a difference. Maybe it made me stand out. Outside, the sun was up, through the cracks in the boards. I could see full daylight, golden and warm, and completely unreachable. I slammed my shoulder against the door, kicked, shouted, but nothing worked. Kara just stood there, eyes empty, lips moving like she was praying, her lantern starting to dim. "If the light goes out," she whispered, "you don't ask for help." Then she blew out her flame. Just like that, darkness swallowed her instantly. I didn't see her after that. Not once, not even a scream. For a long time, I didn't move. The door hadn't opened. Kara was gone, or at least, whatever had been left of her after she blew out the lantern was no longer standing in front of me. I stared at the space where she had been, heart thudding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I should have been running or screaming or losing my mind entirely. But instead, I felt still, frozen, not with fear, but with recognition. Because in that moment, everything started to make sense. The silence, the rules, the objects buried around, the barn. This wasn't about protection. It was about containment. The barn wasn't some haunted relic my family feared. It was something they fed, something they kept. Each summer, someone in the family was selected to participate. Not honored, not punished, just selected. I don't know how. Maybe it had to do with bloodlines or birth order. Or maybe, and this part makes my skin crawl to admit, maybe it was chosen by the barn itself. We'd always been told the ritual was for cleaning, for remembering, but none of us ever came back from it the same. The few times it had been mentioned by relatives, always older ones, always after too much whiskey, they never looked anyone in the eye. Just said things like he left a little too much of himself in there, or she lit the lantern. Wrong. At the time, it sounded like metaphor, but now I know better. I started walking again, retracing my steps. The barn had grown larger somehow. The walls were further apart, and the shadows deeper. I passed by the same corner 3 times before realizing the layout was shifting around me. It wasn't just a maze. It was watching where I moved and adjusting. Not to trap me, but to guide me somewhere. It wasn't trying to lose me. It wanted me to see something. It wanted me to understand. And that was worse than being chased. I came to a room I swear hadn't existed before. A small chamber at the base of the barn's inner wall, low ceiling, beams arched like ribs. There were shelves inside, and each was filled with jars, hundreds of them. Some held teeth, others, locks of hair, some had paper inside. Birth certificates, maybe, or names written in that strange crooked X symbol I'd seen my mother stitching into cloth years ago. One jar had a pair of eyeglasses in it. Another held a single wedding ring, floating, in dark fluid. It hit me like a punch. These weren't offerings. They were trophies, mementos, or worse, ingredients. At the center of the room stood a table with a heavy wooden chair. I didn't want to go near it, but my body moved anyway, like it wasn't mine anymore. There was something lying on the table, wrapped in linen, an object shaped like a bundle of bones. I stepped closer and saw it. It wasn't an object, it was a doll. A handmade, crude little thing with stitches, 4 eyes, and the same hook symbol carved into its chest. On the forehead, in thread, was a name I recognized, my own. I didn't scream. I couldn't. I just reached down and picked it up, hands shaking. It smelled faintly of pine resin and old sweat. Familiar. That kind of smell you only notice in closets filled with forgotten family photos and childhood toys. Holding it felt like waking up into a nightmare I'd already been living my whole life. I looked up and saw movement in the shadows beyond the room. Not fast, not lunging, just shifting, steady, and all around me. The jars began to rattle on their shelves. Light scraped across the wood, as if something massive had passed by on the other side of the wall. Then I heard my grandfather's voice, not in my head, not in memory, but clearly. right behind me. You should have left it alone, he said. I turned and he was there, standing in the narrow doorway like he had been waiting for me. But something was wrong. His skin looked too thin, too stretched, his eyes too dark. They didn't reflect the lantern light. You weren't supposed to open the box, he said. It's not your job to see. I stepped back, cradling the doll, trying to find words. Why? I asked, barely able to breathe. Why do we do this? My grandfather tilted his head. Because something's got to stay in there, and something's got to feed it. You think we do this because we want to, because we like hurting our own. His voice cracked with something close to sorrow. But he didn't move. We don't choose it, it chooses us. That's when I saw his hand. His right one was missing 3 fingers. The flesh around the stumps looked blackened and old, like it had been burned a long time ago. I failed once, he said. A long time ago. Brought the wrong thing, paid the price. You think we leave these offerings for fun? He stepped aside, revealing more shelves behind him. Dozens of dolls, just like the one I held. Each with a different name. Some I recognized. Most I didn't. But one thing was clear. I wasn't the first. I wouldn't be the last. And now I knew what came next. Because if the barn had my name now ... then I was already part of it. No matter what door I tried to run through. No matter how much daylight shone outside. I had crossed the line. And the barn never gave back what it took. I didn't wait to hear anything else from my grandfather. If that thing even was him anymore. The moment I saw the rows of dolls behind him, all bearing names like mine, some faded, some fresh, I turned and ran. I didn't think. I didn't calculate a plan. I just moved, the way animals do when they feel the ground shift beneath them, when they know deep down in some ancient part of their body that they are prey. I still clutched the doll with my name on it, not because I wanted to, but because letting go felt worse somehow, like I'd be leaving something vital behind, something the barn wasn't done using. Last week, a package arrived on my doorstep. No return address. Inside was a jar, old, cloudy glass. Inside the jar, a tooth. Human, molar, with a dark root. Just like the one I'd left behind years ago. On the lid, carved by hand with something sharp, were 3 words. Next summer's yours. I haven't responded. I haven't told anyone. I don't think I need to, because last night, I caught my own reflection in the mirror, just for a second, staring back at me with a different expression than the one I thought I was making. And for the first time, I realized, I'm not sure I ever really left the barn. Maybe no one ever does.